14, Da Dianshan seemed to have used a steely rubbing technique to preserve all the scenes on the flower and bird scroll. He tore off layers of gauze-like white paper for a total of 10 times and then started to sell them publicly. The ship owner called the sisters Chunshui and Chosha to show their faces and help Da Dianshan to bid. Chen Pinggan did not feel anything at first, but he inadvertently saw Chosha standing there with her sister at one end. Chunshui was graceful and flawless. She was very familiar with bidding. Chosha was a simple-minded person. She stared at Chen Pinggan blankly. After seeing his gaze, she was satisfied. She lifted her chin slightly and revealed a proud look. It seemed that until this moment, Chosha felt that she was on the same level as Chen Pinggan for once. Chen Pinggan could not understand the girl's thoughts, so he focused his attention on the steely rubbing paper. After 10 steelies rubbing, the aura became thinner and the scenes became more blurred. The last one could only be seen once. Of course, the price was the lowest. It only cost 30 snowflake jade coins. The ancient jade used to make the coins was called snowflake jade. It was a special jade mine in the northern Bifone continent. It was mainly distributed in the 2 blessed caves. If this popular copper coin was placed under the sun, it would reflect the sparkling and translucent light, like snowflakes floating in the air. It was also known as the small snow coin. The front of the coin was engraved with the words "Good Omen of a Prosperous Year" and the back of the coin was engraved with the words "Small Snowland." As the production of snowflake jade was huge and the aura content was quite high, in the long years, snowflake jade coins gradually became the common currency of the 9 provinces. It was widely circulated and was a must-have item for chi refinement warriors at the bottom and the middle of the mountain. Snowflake jade coins could definitely be exchanged for gold and silver, but gold and silver might not be able to be converted into snowflake jade coins. The reason was very simple. The high-ranking officials and dignitaries at the foot of the mountain were all independent forces. They worshipped the immortals on the mountain. It was not convenient and too eye-catching. If they offered a box of snowflake jade coins, it would be very particular. If the box used to hold the money was more particular, it would be more elegant if it was some spiritual wood. Chen Pinggan gritted his teeth and bought the last painting. It cost 30 small snow coins. As it was the last painting, the ship owner of Da Dianshan handed it to Chen Pinggan personally. Chosha was not as steady as her sister Chunshui. She did not have much respect for the ship owner and was like a little oriole chirping around the branch. The ship owner had watched the nursery. In addition, Chosha's talent was better than Chunshui's. It was not impossible for her to enter the middle 5 states. Therefore, the ship owner's patience with Chosha was actually quite good. This was called casting a long line to catch a big fish. To earn a living on the mountain, one had to look at the long term. Not only did one look at the food on the table and in the pot, one might also look at the food in the field. After the money was handed over, the ship owner teased Chosha. He grabbed a fire pear from the fruit plate beside the sandalwood chair and gave it to the maidservant. Then, he left. Chen Pinggan did not know what was going on, but he received a fierce glare from Chosha. It turned out that the fire pear was Chosha's commission for helping Da Dianshan sell a painting. However, after the glare, Chosha laughed to herself. She raised the fire pear in her hand and waved it at her sister proudly. Life was unpredictable, meeting and parting were unpredictable. After the battle in the Wind and Thunder Garden and Zhengyang Mountain ended, Chen Pinggan parted ways with the Taoist priests outside Dragon Tiger Mountain. He returned to Heaven Room B with Chunshui and Chosha and spent time together. However, when the Kuan boat slowly landed above the ferry in Nanjian Kingdom, it became a coincidence that Chen Pinggan and the Taoist priest Zhongshan met again. They chose to disembark here and waved goodbye to the maidservants Chunshui and Chosha. From then on, they went their separate ways. The ferry in Nanjian Kingdom was built on the border between Nanjian Kingdom and Jiuyu Kingdom. It was above a large lake. Compared to the newly opened Wutong Mountain in Dali Longquan, this ferry was much bigger. It was able to dock 5 Da Dianshan Kuan boats at the same time. The parting with Chunshui and Chosha was not a reluctant farewell. During this period of time, Chen Pinggan shamelessly asked Da Dianshan for many fruits. The two maidservants benefited from this, and Da Dianshan began to criticize the young man from Dali. What was a shallow person who had not seen the world but liked to take advantage of others? Even if Chen Pinggan knew about this, he would not care. Instead, it was Chosha who listened to those sarcastic words and was unhappy. In the end, it became Chun Shui who went to the kitchen of the Kuan boat to ask for some fruits. When Chen Pinggan got off the boat, he brought a lot of melons and fruits. As there were not many people disembarking in Nanjian Kingdom, Chen Pinggan and the Taoist priest with the peachwood sword bumped into each other and walked together. At the railing of the bow, Chosha snorted, "Sister, look at that guy. He is not sad at all after disembarking. Maybe he is thinking about the beautiful world below the mountain." Chun Shui said helplessly, "Young Master Chen is not even interested in Apricot Blossom Lane. Why would he be interested in the brothel? It is not like you don't know how many people who are used to seeing the world indulge in Apricot Blossom Lane on the Kuan boat. After all, there are many women who flatter them in the Apricot Blossom Lane. After all, many of the women in the Apricot Blossom Lane are goddesses and fairies in the eyes of the world. After getting drunk, those men all show their ugly side. Sigh, if the men below the mountain were all like young Master Chen, it would be great." Chosha was a little unconvinced. That's because Chen Pinggan is still young. In the future, he will also become a bad thing like that. Maybe the next time we board the ship, Chen Pinggan will have a glib tongue and touch us. Chun Shui narrowed her eyes and glanced at the embroidered bag on her sister's waist. "Do you really think so?" Chosha suddenly turned her head and pretended to ignore the scene on the lake. Chun Shui looked over and found that Chen Pinggan was clasping his hands to bid farewell to the sisters. He was very much like a Jianghu martial artist. He was indeed a hardworking martial artist. Chun Shui quickly raised her arm and waved. After Chen Pinggan turned around and left, only then did Akashi turn around. She had an angry and playful look on her face. Choshunya teased, "Why do you have to come here? You're so far away from him. You can just politely say goodbye and lose some meat." Chosha glanced at her sister's chest and held back her laughter. "Sister, you are not afraid of losing some weight. Anyway, you have a strong foundation. I can't." The two sisters started to quarrel. When they were young, they always thought that parting was the beginning of their next reunion. Chen Pinggan and the Daoist priest, Old Yang, had a chat and found out that both of them were heading south. Chen Pinggan was heading south because of an inexplicable reason. Lu Chen and Old Yang wanted him to disembark at the Southern Stream Kingdom. He did not dare to be greedy for convenience and went to the next ferry in Old Dragon City. As for the mahogany sword Daoist priest, he was suffering from hunger and cold and really could not afford to take the ferry. If he did not disembark soon, he would probably have to work for the Kuan boat to make a living. The two of them had similar temperaments and agreed to head south together. As for when they would go their separate ways, they did not care about it for now. The ferry where they disembarked was located at the southern border of the Southern Stream Kingdom and the northern border of the ancient Yu Kingdom. The Daoist priest, Zhongshan, was roughly familiar with the language of the Baoping continent. He explained the land of the ancient Yu Kingdom to Chen Pinggan. The ancient Yu Kingdom's emperor was from the Chu family. There were also stories about the origin of the kingdom's name. It was said that in ancient times, there was a goddess who was in charge of the matters of spring. At the same time, she was also in charge of the growth and withering of the plants and trees in the world. There was only one big tree in the ancient Yu Kingdom. It was green in autumn and withered in spring. It was always slower than the others, and this made the goddess very annoyed. She decreed that this tree was born unenlightened and it was extremely difficult for it to become a spirit. This was the origin of the lump of wood of the later generations. The Daoist priest, Zhongshan, was a third realm Qi refinement warrior. His realm had not yet stabilized. However, as a Daoist of the Dragon Tiger Mountains orthodoxy, he was very familiar with the matter of crossing mountains and ridges. Before entering the mountain, the young Daoist priest with the peachwood sword took out a copper bell from his bag and hung it at the end of the peachwood sword. He explained to Chen Pinggan, "This is the demon listening bell. It is the most popular in the Daoist sect. It is similar to the white swamp painting that every Qi refinement warrior has. This string of bells of mine is of the lowest quality and can only be considered a beginner's demon-subduing tool. After injecting spiritual energy into it, it can only sense the demons of the mountains and swamps that are one realm higher than me for a few hours. I am only at the third realm now. Chen Pinggan wanted to say something but stopped. Who would report the depth of their cultivation after meeting someone for only a short while? Then, would it be a fifth realm demon? Chen Pinggan was a little uncertain. Could it be that he and this outer mountain disciple of the Dragon Tiger Mountain were not in the same world and were in the same pugilistic world? His two little fellows, the little boy in green and the little girl in pink, were both chi refinement warriors of the middle 5 realms. Back in his hometown, the little boy in green was still clamoring to not be killed with a single punch every day. Although Chen Pinggan was full of doubts, his impression of the young Daoist priest improved. The young Daoist priest did not notice Chen Pinggan's doubts and was still comforting young Master Chen beside him. But don't worry, young Master Chen. There is a saying on our mountain that no demons will cause trouble within 1,000 miles of the territory of any righteous immortal family. The reason is very simple. Demons do not have the guts to cause trouble in the human world. Once the immortal masters of the middle 5 realms find out, they might be beheaded on the same day, right? Chen Pinggan smiled and nodded in agreement. Scholars visiting the immortals in the mountains had always been the highlight of the literary works of the past generations. It was the same for immortals in disguise to play games and tease the world. On and off the mountain, between the two, there was a connection. Chen Pinggan only knew about the map of the 3 continents including the Aquarius continent after he boarded the ship. There were very few places like Longquan. Many commoners, throughout their lives, had never seen the so-called immortals in the mountains. Daoist priest Chen Pinggan was a genuine warm-hearted person. After some small talk, he heard that Chen Pinggan did not even bring a scroll of white swamp painting with him. He insisted on giving his scroll of white swamp painting to Chen Pinggan, saying that the scroll only cost 2 or 3 copper coins and was the same as the demon listening bell. It was the cheapest item that came from a private workshop. It was crude and sloppy. Even if it was a gift, it would be shabby. Since Chen Pinggan urgently needed one, he would use it first. After all, he had already memorized it by heart. This was probably the so-called child of wealth meeting the child of wealth. Chen Pinggan did not dare to accept it for free. He put his hands into his sleeves to cover his tracks. Then he controlled the square-inch object, took out 2 copper coins and gave them to Daoist priest Zhongshan. The latter hesitated for a moment and only took 1 copper coin. He even said that such an old item was too expensive to sell for 1 copper coin. In fact, when he encountered the wedding dress ghost, the blind Daoist had given him an ancestral mountain search painting. Compared to Zhongshan's white swamp painting, it was indeed 1,000 times better. However, Chen Pinggan gave it to Lin Shuyi. Moreover, Chen Pinggan looked at the white swamp painting while climbing the mountain. He also looked at it with great interest, especially some strange and ghostly images, which were not recorded in the mountain search painting. Chen Pinggan felt that he had gained a lot. When it came to climbing the mountain, Daoist priest Zhongshan might not be able to beat the bumpkin Chen Pinggan even if he traveled for 10 years. Therefore, Chen Pinggan walked very leisurely. Although the Daoist priest with the peachwood sword was not out of breath, he was not relaxed either. Chen Pinggan was not as cautious as he was on the Kuan ship. He deliberately increased the speed of his footsteps. Firstly, Chen Pinggan understood a principle after practicing martial arts in the bamboo house. He needed to relax a little. Secondly, the Kuan boat that sailed through the sea of clouds was worlds apart from the mountains and rivers of the country below the Kuan boat. Chen Pinggan did not need to be too careful. Even an ordinary martial artist of the third realm would not pose too much of a threat if he traveled alone in the territory of a country. Lastly, the most important reason was that Chen Pinggan was very assured of the Taoist priest Zhongshan. Chen Pinggan trusted this feeling of familiarity at first sight. It was just like when he saw Mr. Qi standing outside the school and Li Shisheng standing outside the Li family's door. Chen Pinggan trusted his intuition. As the two of them traveled through mountains and rivers, 20 years passed quickly. The journey was smooth and there were no setbacks. Chen Ping'an and the young Daoist priest became closer. Chen Ping'an would openly practice the six-step stance. When he stopped to rest, he would practice the sword furnace. Daoist priest Zhongshan actually practiced the five thunder technique. Because of Lin Shuyi and the blind Daoist, Chen Ping'an was not unfamiliar with this. Zhongshan often made strange postures. He stood on one leg and clenched his fist to hit a certain qi residence in his abdomen, making a very regular whistling sound. Sometimes, he would bend his elbow and press his fingers against the meridians in his neck. With the other hand, he would form a sword with two fingers closed. His mouth was closed, and his abdomen rumbled like thunder, making a muffled sound. This was the first time Chen Ping'an met someone who was as diligent in cultivation as he was when it came to practicing martial arts. This was probably the key reason why the two of them could travel south together. They both suffered hardships, but they could still enjoy it. Occasionally, when night fell, the two of them would find a shelter from the wind and rain, an ancient temple or a cave, and light a bonfire. The young Daoist priest would tell Chen Ping'an about the power of the sword cultivators in Luzhu, and how the Daoist priests there were treated with disdain. If a sword cultivator wanted to buy a spiritual weapon, it could be bought for 10 coins. If a Daoist priest wanted to buy it, he might have to pay double the price. When the gentle young Daoist priest talked about this, he would show an expression of anger for the first time. He said that if it was possible in the future, he would definitely change these rules. When the young Daoist priest confirmed that Chen Ping'an was a martial arts practitioner, he was actually puzzled. If the cultivation of qi was said to be the biggest money-squandering hole in the world, then martial arts was deservedly second. Similarly, one had to spend countless gold and silver. Ever since Zhongshan left the mountain, he had not lived a comfortable day. Occasionally, he would gain something, but after weighing the pros and cons, he would exchange it for a talisman that could save his life, or one or two instruments that were most suitable for subduing demons. For example, the simplest divine travel talisman could help the young Daoist priest quickly escape from the battlefield when he encountered a great demon. To travel a few miles away, it would cost Zhongshan 30 coins. One coin was worth at least 100 taels of silver. This meant that Zhongshan had to rely on his own ability to earn at least 3,000 taels of silver in order to buy a divine travel talisman. However, the young Daoist priest had a cultivation of the third realm. In the Julu continent, where sword cultivators on the mountain and swordsmen at the foot of the mountain were as numerous as the hairs on a cow, he had to face hardships all the way to the south. The demons that he subdued were mostly mischievous spirits. The demons that he subdued were mostly ghosts that had yet to gain intelligence. It was not easy to earn money. Sometimes, when he encountered a powerful second-realm demon, the young Daoist priest might even have to give up some of his family's wealth. The real source of income was the water and land Daoist temples and weddings and funerals. Especially those that required a large number of Daoist priests to make up the numbers, it was the fastest and easiest way to earn money. Unfortunately, such good things could only be encountered by chance. Therefore, when Zhongshan heard that the Aquarius continent worshipped Taoism and did not look down on Taoists as much as the Julu continent, he wanted to cross the continent to the south to see if there were any opportunities here. In the end, not long after he boarded the ship, he almost starved to death. This caused the young Daoist priest's heart to be filled with gloom for this trip to the Aquarius continent. The ancient Yu kingdom's territory was not large. The two of them quickly crossed the border and entered the Tsai kingdom's territory. They traveled at night and encountered a sudden rainstorm. Strangely, after the two of them entered a mountain range with few people and walked for more than 10 miles, there was no place suitable for shelter from the rain. There were rugged rocks and many exposed cliffs. Moreover, there were occasional trees on the mountain, but they were mostly withered and dead. Some of the rare trees that were green were far from luxuriant. Therefore, the raindrops that were the size of soybeans fell on the two of them continuously, causing them to feel suffocated. Chen Ping'an was in the bamboo house of Luo Po Mountain. He had honed the 3 realms of martial man to an abnormal level. Of course, his expression did not change and his heart did not race. However, Daoist priest Zhongshan had just attained the 3 realms of martial man not long ago. The toughness of a chi cultivator's physique was naturally incomparable to a pure martial man of the realm. Moreover, his foundation of the three realms was average. Therefore, the young Daoist priest's face was ghastly pale and his lips were ashen. Chen Pinggan knew that if he continued to endure, even if Zhongshan could survive tonight's rain, he would probably fall sick the next day. Chen Pinggan stopped in his tracks and patted Zhongshan's shoulder. He loudly told Zhongshan to stay where he was and try his best to maintain a steady breathing. He would quicken his pace and find a way out alone. Regardless of the outcome, he would definitely come back to look for him within 5 minutes. Zhongshan was stunned. The young Daoist priest, who was a little dizzy from the torrential rain, moved his lips slightly and his voice was as soft as a mosquito's. In the heavy rain, even Chen Pinggan could not hear what he was saying clearly. However, seeing that Zhongshan's body was becoming increasingly weak and could not continue to be pounded by the rain, Chen Pinggan did not hesitate any longer. He smiled at him and turned to leave quickly. The young Daoist priest sat cross-legged and began to resist the bone-piercing cold with all his might. The lower 5 realms of chi cultivators were known as the 5 mountaineering realms. They drew in the chi of heaven and earth outside the human body to strengthen the human body's skin, flesh, tendons, bones, and blood. The first and second realms were known as the bronze skin realm and the grassroot realm. They could strengthen the chi cultivator's skin and make his blood vigorous. Logically speaking, no matter how heavy the rain was, a young Daoist who had reached the third realm, the willow tendon realm, should be able to draw chi and strengthen his tendons and bones. However, this external disciple of the Dragon Tiger Mountain who carried a peachwood sword on his back walked the path of the Taoist talisman. He relied more on external objects such as the divine travel talisman and the peachwood sword. The effect of strengthening the body was not outstanding. Moreover, this spring rain was too sudden and gloomy, causing the young Daoist priest to unknowingly use up his chi at an extremely fast rate. The snow-white young Daoist priest's vision was blurry. He was in a dilemma as to whether or not he should take off his bag and take out a chi replenishing pill from the porcelain bottle. However, no matter how bad the quality of a chi replenishing pill was, the young Daoist priest was not willing to part with it. He clenched his teeth and bitterly persevered, hoping that the young martial artist would be able to leave and return quickly and successfully find a place to hide from the rain. When one reached the mountain, there were times when one would have to suffer the hardships of the mountain. On this point, the monsters of Dragon Spring Town were an example. The common people in the marketplace were completely unaware. However, the momentum of Ruan Jiao's sword forging would make them wish they were dead. Chen Pinggan quickly walked half a kilometer away. He no longer hid his third realm cultivation and rushed forward. When he saw a large tree that only had withered branches left in front of him, he ran up a few steps, stepped on the tree trunk, and pushed upwards. Grabbing onto a decaying branch, he pulled lightly. His body floated up, and the branch collapsed and fell to the ground. Chen Pinggan, however, had already advanced a step further. Standing at the top of the large tree, he extended his hand to cover his forehead. Raising his eyes, he looked into the distance. He could not see any lights, but at the end, there was a small hill that was not very tall. Chen Pinggan leapt up lightly. His feet suddenly kicked off the tree trunk, and he used the momentum to fly away. The large tree behind him fell to the ground with a loud crash. His body tilted downwards. After shooting out like an arrow, Chen Pinggan landed on the ground. He extended his hand and slapped the muddy ground that splashed everywhere. His entire body somersaulted forward in the air. When his feet landed on the ground, he pushed off with the tip of his toes and rushed forward like a cat. He was extremely agile, and very soon, he arrived at the small hill. After reaching the top, his field of vision widened, but he still could not see even a single light. This made Chen Pinggan feel that it was rather troublesome. If it really did not work out, he could only temporarily chop down trees on the way back and set up a crude tent. However, looking at Zhongshan's appearance and complexion, even if he hid in the tent, once the bonfire could not be lit, he would most likely still catch a cold and fall sick. In fact, Chen Pinggan was also a little puzzled in his heart. This large stretch of low and winding mountain range was indeed a little strange. He had been to many mountains and rivers, But he really did not see a place that gave people such a withered and decayed feeling. If it was a grave filled with gloomy aura, it would be fine if it was this desolate, but why was it that this place was even colder than other places when it was raining heavily? Just when Chen Pinggan was about to turn back and look for the young Taoist, he suddenly saw a faint light at the end of his field of vision. It was moving slowly towards the north. The light swayed slightly in the curtain of rain, like a small boat bobbing up and down in the stormy sea, and could capsize and be extinguished at any time. Chen Pinggan thought for a moment and remembered the direction of the light. He quickly turned around and went back the way he came. He found the tottering young Taoist and helped him up. He said that there were people in front who were also rushing through the night and wanted to see if they could meet up. If they were locals, they might know a place to hide from the rain. The young Taoist was refreshed. Chen Pinggan did not say anything and carried him on his back and rushed forward. Chen Pinggan carried the locust wood sword box on his back, and at the same time carried a young Taoist carrying a peachwood sword on his back. They ran wildly in the rainy night, crossing mountains and ridges as if they were running on flat ground. As the young Taoist became more and more drowsy, the light became brighter and brighter. Chen Pinggan slowed down slightly and looked up. He had been observing the situation over there. In the heavy rain, there were also two people walking together. The two young people looked like scholars, carrying a book box on their back. One of them held a big umbrella, and the other held a torch. Although they were as down and out as Chen Pinggan and the others, compared to the bleakness of the young Taoist, the two scholars were smiling and talking about something. It seemed that they did not feel that the wind and rain blocking their way was a difficult thing. Instead, it was something to be happy about. The two of them did not seem to notice Chen Pinggan quietly approaching. This also made Chen Pinggan feel slightly relieved. In the wilderness on a rainy night, there must be a demon. Once they met with an accident, they could not leave the Taoist on their back. It would definitely be a tough battle. Chen Pinggan was a distance away, and used the language of the Aquarius continent to shout loudly. The two scholars did not hear him and continued to move forward. Chen Pinggan breathed a sigh of relief again. Even if it was a qi cultivator or a demon in the wilderness, their cultivation would not be high. Of course, in the early stage, the other party did not deliberately hide their strength. Only when they were more than 10 steps away did the two scholars notice Chen Pinggan. They quickly stopped and waved to Chen Pinggan. After a conversation, looking at the young Taoist's pale face, one of the scholars from the colorful clothes nation pointed to a place and comforted him. "I like to travel around in my life, and often travel alone. I remember that this place is desolate, but about 3 to 4 miles away, there is a house. It is very likely that it was built by a hermit. Brother Liu and I are heading towards this place. You might as well travel with us." The other scholar holding the umbrella smiled bitterly and said, "We were originally camping on a hillside a mile away. Who would have thought that there would be such a huge rainstorm? If Brother Chu did not know the way, we would not have been able to get help." Chen Pinggan quickly thanked him. The two scholars who met by chance, one of them helped to hold the umbrella over the head of the Taoist in front of the year, while the other was drenched in the rain, shivering from the cold. The scholar who was holding the torch had a gloomy look on his face. Without the shelter of the umbrella, even if the oil used in the torch was not ordinary, it was still extinguished by the pouring rain. He really couldn't bear to throw it away, so he held it in his arms. The scholar could only rely on the light of lightning and thunder to move forward with difficulty based on his memory. They really did manage to find a house. It was like a solid door in a county city. Although there were stone lions guarding the door, it was small and not grand. But for some reason, there were no spring festival couplets or door gods. Finally, there was a chance to take a breather under the roof to hide from the rain. The scholar who put away the umbrella quickly knocked on the door, not caring about etiquette. After a long time, the door creaked open. Just then, a flash of lightning in the sky lit up the night sky, revealing a haggard and terrifying old face. The scholar was so scared that he staggered and almost fell backwards. The sudden appearance of the old woman's face in the suddenly bright curtain of rain, not to mention the scholar who was not brave enough, even Chen Pinggan who had seen many gods and monsters was shocked. Everyone only felt that the inside of the house might not be as peaceful and warm as outside in the rain. The Taoist priest Zhongshan, who was the most knowledgeable in the matter of subduing demons and monsters, had already fallen asleep. 2:15. There is still the second chapter. The old woman's face was pale and her body was bent. She stared at the four people outside the door. The scholar who knocked on the door was very timid. Upon seeing the eerie old lady, he did not dare to look at himself. He hid behind his companions. He felt that there was no way out. He was miserable. This scholar loved to read books and records when he was young. He would often find strange stories about ghosts and spirits from the books that were sent to him. There were two types of stories about old friends. The first type was beautiful and gentle, similar to the fox spirit who loved the scholar, and the second type was the one in front of him. It was eerie and ghostly. Even if one stayed in it at night, the courtyard was deep and richly ornamented. If one was lucky enough to survive till dawn and leave, it would become a deserted graveyard where foxes and rabbits roamed about. In the midst of the wind and rain, in the cold weather, the scholar who held the torch was more daring than his companions. He shook the big book box on his back, rubbed his hands to warm it up, and laughed bitterly. "Old aunt, can you let us stay for the night? The rain outside is too heavy. We have friends who cannot stand the cold and have already fainted. If we do not have a warm place, it is hard to say if we can survive the night. I hope old aunt can help us. Just treat it as saving a life. It is better than building a 7-storied pagoda." The old lady's face was stiff. She spoke in a difficult-to-understand local dialect, as if she was questioning something. The scholar's face was full of bitterness. He could only use the same dialect as the old lady to explain. The old lady slightly turned her pair of dead fish eyes, staring at Chen Pingan. She actually used the language of Aquarius continent. "A martial artist?" Chen Pingan nodded. The old lady looked at the young Daoist priest on Chen Pingan's back, revealing the peachwood sword hilt. After falling asleep, the Daoist priest's breathing was more stable than when he was awake. This was probably the mystical thing about the chi cultivator. Everything returned to the natural state. It was unexpected. When the old lady saw the peachwood sword, her eyes narrowed. "Your friend is a Daoist cultivator?" Chen Pingan continued to nod. The old lady finally looked at the cowering scholar holding the umbrella. "A scholar?" The scholar with a suet jade pendant on his waist shook his head. "He has not passed the imperial examinations. He is not considered a scholar." The corners of the old woman's mouth twitched, and her shoulders shook as she made way. "Since you are all decent people, please come in. Remember to rest in your room after you enter. Don't wander around. If you disturb my master, you will have to bear the consequences. There is a charcoal brazier in the room. Please feel free to do as you please. There is no need to ask. You are a guest. My master will not be so calculative." When the old lady closed the door, the old lady's house, the door, in her hands, as if it was light as a feather, the door. This residence was not small. It should be a courtyard with 4 courtyards. Chen Pingan and the other 3 were arranged to stay in the second courtyard. They were told that they could not go to the courtyard at the back. The eaves of the house were carved with auspicious beasts, flowers, birds, mountains, rivers, and clouds. The window flowers were exquisite, and the ground in the courtyard was paved with green and red stone bricks. The main and secondary roads were clear and orderly. The corridor was connected to the main room and the side rooms, so that people could walk freely in this rainy day. The old lady's figure disappeared into the narrow corridor connecting the second and third courtyards. It was pitch black. Suddenly, there was a flash of lightning. Before the 2 scholars could withdraw their gazes, they saw the old lady's deathly pale smiling face, scaring them out of their wits. They hurriedly went to the adjacent rooms. The 2 scholars surnamed Chu and Liu did not dare to sleep separately. They could only temporarily gather in one room. The scholar surnamed Liu put down the umbrella and lit the lamp to read the sage books in order to boost his courage. The scholar surnamed Chu was a bit more courageous, otherwise he would not have known that there was a house here. He put down the torch and began to fiddle with the brazier. He took out a fire roll wrapped tightly in oil paper from the book box and quickly lit the charcoal fire, warming the room up quickly. He looked around and stretched out his hand to press down on the bed. The bedding was suffused with a faint damp and moldy smell. However, this was also unavoidable. After the beginning of spring in the beautiful clothes nation, it was rainy and there was almost no sun. It was not good for him to criticize his master on this kind of matter. Moreover, Having a place to rest his feet was already a blessing in disguise. The scholar surnamed Chu had a green headscarf tied around his head. He was slender and had a dignified appearance. There was an awe-inspiring righteousness between his eyebrows. He looked around and found that the window panes were ever-changing. The style was exquisite and had a beautiful meaning. There were carvings of bats, carps, and ganoderma. Generally, only a scholarly family would have such thoughts. He suddenly approached the window and looked at it with rapt attention. He found that there seemed to be some traces of red paint on the slightly wider wooden strip between the two windows. The writing was mottled and blurred, but he could vaguely see that it was some talisman language. As the room gradually warmed up, the scholar surnamed Liu became more courageous. He put down the book in his hand and saw that his companion seemed to be staring at the window. He followed his gaze and looked up. As a result, he saw a patch of red outside the window, reflecting an old face. She said in a hoarse voice, "It's already late. I hope the two of you can rest early." The sudden appearance of the old woman who was patrolling the night with a lantern almost scared the two scholars to death. The old woman had just walked over from the side room across the courtyard. The young man with the case on his back was also reading by the light. He also looked at the window, but he was not so panicked. The old woman shook her head and staggered away. She laughed and said, "The courage of scholars is still a little small." In the side room across the courtyard, Chen Pinggan stood near the window and whispered, "The old woman has left." It turned out that the young Taoist had woken up before entering the house. He swallowed a young returning elixir and drank Chen Pinggan's Jianghu liquor. He was immediately refreshed. Originally, he did not want to waste a single elixir, but he suddenly felt a flash of demonic aura. He did not dare to be stingy with the elixir. After all, a small amount of money could not be compared to his own life. The Taoist priest Zhongshan sat up from the bed and put on a brand new Taoist robe. He bent over and sat beside the brazier. He reached out to warm himself by the fire. He lowered his voice and said, "Chen Pinggan, let's take turns to keep watch tonight. Otherwise, I'm really worried. I always feel that something is not right here." Chen Pinggan smiled and said, "You only need to hang the peachwood sword with the demon listening bell near the window. I don't know much about demons, so I still need the bell to remind me. As for keeping watch at night, I'm very good at it. You can sleep at ease. If something really happens, I won't be unable to even notify you." The Taoist priest Zhongshan thought for a while and found a reason. "After hanging the peachwood sword and the demon listening bell, I'll warm myself by the fire. It won't be too late to sleep when my body is completely warm." When the young Taoist priest was hanging the wooden sword at an angle, Chen Pinggan said, "Someone once drew a talisman on the window frame, but it's been a long time, so I can't see it clearly. But it should be your Taoist talisman. Do you recognize it?" The young Taoist priest didn't notice it at first, but after Chen Pinggan reminded him, he looked carefully and found some clues. He couldn't help but admire Chen Pinggan's courage and carefulness. After looking carefully, his face became more and more serious. Finally, he stretched out his finger and gently touched the traces of vermilion paint. He sniffed at the tip of his nose and silently sat back in his chair. "If it's really as I think, it's a bit troublesome. The talisman drawn on the window frame is a vermilion script used to drive away ghosts. Looking at the remnants, it should be a kind of Shen Guang sect's Qing Ci talisman. It's written with a special vermilion paint and has great power. Since it's the work of a senior master of Shen Guang sect and almost covered half of the window frame, it can be imagined that the evil ghost that the senior had to face must be very powerful." The young Taoist sighed and said regretfully, "If I had known this, I wouldn't have saved the young elixir and taken it earlier. I wouldn't have been in a coma when I got close to the house. Otherwise, I have some experience in geomancy and geomancy. With a little observation from afar, I could roughly see what kind of school this house is, and the basic method of gathering geomancy, whether it's yang or yin, whether it's deviated from the right path. As long as I could identify the general pattern, I could deduce many things." "Chen Pinggan, I'm sorry, I put you in danger." Chen Pinggan listened to the young Taoist priest's self-reproach and didn't say anything to comfort him. He just joked, "Celestial Master Zhong, Isn't it your specialty to eliminate evil and protect the right path? The young Taoist priest hurriedly waved his hands. No, no, no. I don't deserve the title of Celestial Master. The true Heavenly Masters are the direct descendants of the Zhong family of Mount Longhu's Heavenly Master abode. All of them wear yellow and purple and are the mountain's prime ministers who have been hereditary for thousands of years. Aside from that, there are also Heavenly Masters with external surnames who have ascended to the middle 5 realms and are also qualified to be bestowed the title of Heavenly Master. However, there are many different types of Heavenly Masters on Mount Longhu. The first-rate Heavenly Masters are the old immortals of the upper 5 realms who have entered the ancestral hall of Mount Longhu to enjoy the incense. Below them are the direct descendants of the Zhong family who were born in yellow and purple. One of them will be given the Heavenly Master Seal and an immortal sword in the future. Below them are the many Heavenly Masters with external surnames who cultivate on Mount Longhu. As a blessed land, Mount Longhu is open to the public. All Qi cultivators need to do is promise to descend the mountain to slay demons and devils after they succeed in their cultivation. When the time comes, Mount Longhu will bestow a wooden sword made of peach wood. Chen Pinggan listened carefully and felt that Mount Longhu and Celestial Master Zhong were indeed good people. It was raining cats and dogs. The 2 small stone lions at the entrance of the residence made slight cracking sounds from time to time. The old woman stood outside the main building of the 3rd courtyard. She stepped on a small stool and hung the lantern on the pillar of the corridor. The light was dim and swayed in the wind. With a puff, the light went out. It turned out that the candle inside had burned out. The old woman coughed and stood on the stool again. She took down the lantern and took out a brand new candle that was as red as blood from her sleeve. If one looked closely, there was no wick. The old woman turned her back to the courtyard and plucked a strand of white hair from her head. She suddenly inserted it into the center of the candle as if she was using it as a wick material. Then, the old woman gently breathed into the candle and the candle was instantly lit. She put the lantern back into it and hung it on the pillar again. The lantern swayed slightly and the light shone in the residence. If it was a clear night, it would definitely attract moths to the flame. It was unknown what the purpose of its existence was on a rainy night in the wilderness. The young Daoist priest was not sleepy. Chen Pinggan drank the strong wine in the vermilion wine gourd and listened to Zhongshan talk about his thrilling encounters with demons. Chen Pinggan made a shushing gesture. The young Daoist priest subconsciously looked at the peachwood sword by the window. The bell was quiet and there was nothing unusual. Soon, there was a knock on the door. It turned out that the 2 scholars had come to visit. Chen Pinggan held the wine gourd and went to open the door. The heavy rain outside was still frightening. Moreover, the wind and rain were slanting so that there was no dry place in the corridor. The slender scholar surnamed Chu held an umbrella in one hand and a wine gourd in the other. He had a smile on his face. The scholar surnamed Liu put his hands to his mouth and breathed out to warm himself. He smiled and said, "Brother Chu went out this time and brought a few bottles of good wine. Now there is only 1 bottle left. I'm not afraid to tell you that I don't dare to sleep tonight. I was thinking of using the wine to go back and sleep." Brother Chu said that it is better to have fun together than to enjoy alone. If the 2 of you are willing to drink a few mouthfuls, why don't we drink together? Let's make it clear in advance. I can drink at least half a liter of wine, so you can only drink a little. Please forgive me. Chen Pinggan raised the vermilion wine gourd in his hand and said with a smile, "I brought my own wine. The 3 of you can share a bottle." The scholar surnamed Liu, who held the umbrella for Chen Pinggan and the young Daoist, strode into the room. He laughed heartily. "That is good. That is good." The scholar surnamed Chu smiled and followed him. He placed the umbrella at the foot of the wall. The 4 of them sat around the brazier and simmered the wine for a while. The scholar surnamed Liu slapped his head. "I forgot to take the wine cup." Then he smiled bitterly and looked at his companion. "Brother Chu, I don't dare to take it." The scholar surnamed Chu smiled and stood up. He helplessly said, "If there are ghosts in the world, then there is no need to be afraid of death. This is a good thing. Besides, a scholar's stomach is filled with righteousness." Presumably, even ghosts and gods have to respect you. What are you afraid of? As the number of people increased, the scholar surnamed Liu became angry. He joked, I couldn't even pass the small high scholar exam. That means the righteousness in my stomach isn't worth much. Of course I'm afraid. Brother Chu is a talented grand scholar, far surpassing me. Of course you don't need to be afraid. The scholar surnamed Chu smiled and shook his head. He strode away. His figure soon appeared in the opposite room. He pushed open the door and closed it. He quickly walked back and brought back 4 wine cups. On the inside of the wine cups were 2 valiant and spirited 5-colored roosters. The Daoist priest Zhongshan took one of the wine cups. He tentatively asked, Brother Chu, Brother Liu, this wouldn't be the beautiful robes country's unique cockfighting cup, right? The scholar surnamed Liu's eyes lit up. Daoist priest has also heard of our beautiful robes country's cockfighting cup? The lamp on the table was not bright enough, so the young Daoist pinched the wine cup between his fingers and tilted it. With the help of the light from the brazier, he carefully observed the 2 5-colored roosters and sighed, famous, famous, naturally I have heard of them. I come from the Juelu continent in the north. When I was roaming the Jianghu, I once saw 2 martial artists throw away a lot of money, gambling on cockfights. It was very magical. I heard that as long as half of the wine is poured into the cup and a wisp of spiritual energy is injected into the cup, the 2 roosters will fight on their own and will not stop until one of them is dead. Even the middle 5 immortals of the 10th realm may not be able to predict the outcome of the fight. Therefore, as long as the cockfighting cup leaves your Aquarius continent, the price of the cockfighting cup will skyrocket by 100 or even 1,000 times. The ferry port of the Southern Stream Kingdom and the cockfighting cup of the Colorful Clothes Kingdom are one of the important goods to board the ship. The scholar surnamed Liu's face was quite proud. He nodded and smiled. What do you mean by spiritual qi? I don't know. I only know that our beautiful robes country's Jianghu masters like to make fun of it. After pouring wine into the cup, they only need to pinch it with 2 fingers to make the cockfighting cup come to life. Then they will fight endlessly until the winner is decided. As for why it is so mysterious, I once saw some records in the county records. It said that the 5-colored clay used to make the cockfighting cup is a unique and interesting thing in the world. It is said that once this clay leaves the beautiful robes country, it will change its smell in a short time. It is no different from ordinary clay. That is why the cockfighting cup has become our unique porcelain. The Taoist priest Zhongshan was amazed. He thought that if anyone could monopolize the clay used to make the cockfighting cup, wouldn't they become rich overnight? Chen Pinggan believed this saying because Chen Pinggan had a deep understanding of the nature of the soil because of porcelain making. The ancestors of the Longquan kill workers had been kill workers for generations. When they made porcelain, they had to deal with the soil. Therefore, Chen Pinggan had heard a lot of supernatural sayings. For example, Old Man Yarrow once said that when the soil left the ground, it would be molded into a clay bodhisattva that would eat incense. It could also be made into porcelain and sent to the emperor's house. It could also be made into broken bottles and cans in the common people's house, unable to escape being baked in fire and soaked in water. The scholar surnamed Liu drank 3 bottles of wine. His face was red and he was tipsy. This was the moment when his mental state was the best. He shook his head slightly and asked with a smile, Taoist priest carries a peachwood sword on his back. At first glance, I can tell that you are an immortal. Can you make this cockfighting cup come to life? If you can, why don't we make a bet and have some fun? What should we bet on? The scholar's face glowed with a strange expression. It was obvious that drinking and not drinking were 2 completely different people. Moreover, they were more or less gambling. The scholar surnamed Chu sighed and softly advised, Brother Liu, you drank half a liter of wine. Quickly rest. The Taoist priest Zhongshan also quickly said, a cockfighting cup can be worth a lot of money. Why waste it? The scholar surnamed Liu drank the wine in his cup in one gulp. He waved his hand and smashed the wine cup in his hand against the wall, smashing it into pieces. He laughed and said, since ancient times, sages have been lonely. Only those who drank left their names. Those who left their names died. Only this thing can last for thousands of years. How much money can a cockfighting cup be worth in Tsai country? It's only 2 taels of silver. How much is a jinsha worth? That's expensive. In any case, Liu Zhen, can't afford it. The scholar surnamed Chu looked embarrassed and explained, after Brother Liu gets drunk, he likes to talk nonsense. I sincerely hope that Taoist priest and young master can forgive him. Chen Pinggan smiled and drank silently. In the end, the drunken Liu Zhen was supported back by his companions. Zhongshan sent him to the door. Chen Pinggan glanced at the door. He didn't get up and move. In the heavy rain, a bearded swordsman walked through the heavy rain. He strode towards the house and knocked on the door. The old woman stood in the doorway and asked with a hoarse voice, "What's the matter?" The man shouted, "Shelter from the rain." The old woman said gloomily, "You're full of energy when you speak. You don't look like someone who needs shelter from the rain." The man said unhappily, "What? Your house doesn't even have a place to stay?" The old woman laughed and said, "There are some places to stay. It's just that you're full of energy. I'm afraid that my master won't like it. If you annoy my master who has a bad temper, not to mention a place to stay, there will be a place to put 178 pounds of refined meat." The swordsman's beard was as hard as a halberd. He held the hilt of his sword with one hand and stared at the door with his eyes wide open. "Nonsense. Hurry up and open the door. This rain is so evil. How can I not shelter from the rain? How can I go to the brothel in the future? Won't I be laughed at to death by those little demons?" The door slowly opened. The old woman sighed softly and said, "It's better to be laughed at than to die for real." The bearded swordsman was slightly stunned, but soon he laughed and said, "I'm a virgin and have accumulated young energy for more than 30 years. What's there to be afraid of? Not to mention demons and ghosts, even their ancestors will take the initiative to avoid me when they see me." The coarse man walked into the courtyard. He frowned when he saw the screen wall. The old woman slammed the door again. A stone lion outside the door made a cracking sound. It turned out that its head fell to the ground and smashed into pieces. However, this movement was already covered by the sound of the heavy rain. In some of the big clans of the southern Aquarius continent, the women lived in their own boudoirs. Some of the stricter aristocratic families would even tear down the stairs and put the unmarried women in their boudoirs like books. They would wait for the day of marriage. The last courtyard was an embroidered building. On the second floor, there were beauties. It was deep in the night, but there was a man drawing the woman's eyebrows. The eyebrow pencil in his hand gently fell on the woman's face. The woman was badly mutilated and rotten. Many parts of her body exposed her white bones. There were even white maggots rolling around. However, one could still see her smile. 2:16. Zhongshan watched the 2 scholars go to the opposite room. Standing in the corridor, he reached out his hand and caught a handful of rainwater. He weighed it in his hand and poured it away. Then, he returned to the room and closed the door. Using his dry hand, he took out an ordinary yellow paper talisman. Zhongshan said softly, "There is indeed something wrong with this place. The rainwater is quite gloomy. It is very likely that it contains a murderous aura. This talisman I have is called the Fiery Killing Talisman. It is very ordinary, but it is widely used because it can sense the presence of murderous aura." The young Daoist pinched the talisman with 2 fingers and silently chanted an incantation. Then, he quickly stuck the talisman onto his wet palm. The yellow talisman burned in Zhongshan's palm and quickly turned into ashes. The young Daoist's face was solemn as he scraped the ashes into the brazier. Chen Pinggan asked, "How much is this talisman?" Taoist Zhongshan did not find it strange at all. He answered seriously, "This kind of talisman is not popular, just like how officials are not popular. It is the same principle. Therefore, the price is low. The cost is only a piece of yellow paper. With the copying skills of a chi cultivator of the lower 5 realms, 1 piece of snow can buy nearly 30 burning evil spirit talismans. If converted to silver, it is 3 taels of silver per piece. It is really not expensive." Chen Pinggan nodded. Regarding the talisman drawing, he had seen the mystery of the barrier-breaking talisman with his own eyes. At that time, he was bewitched by the ghost in the wedding dress on the mountain road. Everyone was walking on the road to the underworld and fell into a dangerous situation similar to the ghost wall. Lin Shuyi used a barrier-breaking talisman that belonged to the mountain river talisman to lead everyone forward. After that, at the bamboo house in Luopa Mountain, Li Shisheng drew character talismans on the bamboo house wall. The talisman was formed when the character was formed. In fact, it was a very high level of attainment and realm. In the end, he asked the book boy Kui Ci to give Chen Pinggan an introductory book on Taoist talisman and a large stack of talisman papers of different materials. Of course, there was also the small wind and snow cone brush, which made it so that if Chen Pinggan wanted to draw talismans in a hurry, there was no need for vermilion ink paste. He only needed to breathe at the tip of the brush to moisten the tip of the brush. However, Chen Pinggan flipped through the thin booklet Authentic Alchemy Works a few times and learned 5 to 6 types of the most basic talisman recorded in the book. Moreover, according to the book, drawing talismans in the world was the same as writing alchemy works. It was divided into 9 grades. Qi refinement warriors of the upper 5 states would write alchemy works of the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grades. Middle 5 states would write alchemy works of the 4th, 5th, and 6th grades. Lower 5 states would write alchemy works of the lower 3 grades. Although Chen Pinggan was not a Qi refinement warrior, he relied on the one breath of the 18 halting sword aura to smoothly write some introductory talisman in the authentic alchemy works. To the current Chen Pinggan, writing any higher grade talisman was an extravagant hope. Li Shisheng once said that drawing talismans was the same as practicing swordsmanship. This was also Li Shisheng's original intention of teaching a man how to fish instead of teaching a man how to fish. However, Chen Pinggan still hoped to concentrate on practicing swordsmanship all the way to the south. Therefore, he only took the time to write 3 types of talisman, namely the land contraction talisman, the yang energy light lifting talisman, and the demon subduing pagoda talisman. The land contraction talisman allowed Chen Pinggan to shrink the ground to an inch in the blink of an eye. With one step, he could go to any place within a radius of 100 feet. The yang energy light lifting talisman was a type of mountain and water obstacle breaking talisman. If he was in the ancient ruins of a mass grave, he could follow the light lifting talisman and successfully walk out of the maze if he were to encounter the situation of ghosts going around in circles again. The demon subduing pagoda talisman was a type of talisman that was more lethal. Once the talisman paper was used, an exquisite pagoda would appear out of thin air and temporarily detain the demon within. It contained the power of thunder and could whip the soul. These 3 talismans belonged to the most common category recorded in the true alchemy works. They were not highly rated and were only recorded as typical examples of a certain type of talisman. The Daoist priest Zhongshan had drunk wine and could not hold his liquor well. Thinking of Chen Pinggan helping to keep watch at night and saving a yang recovery pill, he was already exhausted from the heavy rain pounding his body all the way and fell asleep in a daze. Chen Pinggan was very familiar with keeping watch at night. After Zhongshan fell asleep, he suddenly turned his head and looked at the foot of the wall on the other side of the door. Over there was an umbrella that had been left behind. This oil paper umbrella was first held up by the scholar surnamed Liu. After entering the house, it was held up by the scholar surnamed Chu. The umbrella was quietly leaning against the foot of the wall. The tip of the umbrella was facing the ground and the handle was facing upwards. Even though the umbrella was placed like this, there was almost no trace of water on the ground. This was illogical. Moreover, Chen Pinggan sensed a trace of yin qi that made his back shiver. Thus, Chen Pinggan stood up. As if he had drunk too much wine, his steps were unsteady. As he walked, he grumbled, "How can an umbrella be placed upside down like this? In my hometown, if someone dared to do this, they would be scolded to death by the elders." When he reached the corner of the wall, Chen Pinggan even burped. He reached out to grab the handle of the umbrella and was about to turn it upside down. However, suddenly, a talisman slipped out of his sleeve. Chen Pinggan's eyes were cold. There was not the slightest hint of drunkenness. His 2 fingers pinched the yellow paper like lightning. It was precisely the demon-suppressing pagoda talisman. With a paw, he pressed it on the handle of the umbrella. A 7-colored glazed pagoda appeared in the air. The light of the pagoda just happened to cover the oil paper umbrella. The veined patterns on the surface of the umbrella twisted and immediately emitted a sizzling sound, like fat meat being placed into a pot. The brilliance of the floating pagoda dimmed and soon vanished. Chen Pinggan decided to go all the way. In case his skills were not good enough and the quality of his talismans was too low, he simply took out the other 2 demon-suppressing pagoda talismans and stuck them on the surface of the oil paper umbrella as fast as lightning. Then, without needing to take a deep breath, Chen Pinggan, who was at the peak of the 3 realms of martial arts, circulated his qi according to his will. His fist aura suddenly burst out, and he smashed the 3 demon-suppressing pagoda talismans continuously with his inch punch. The aura of his fists did not destroy the umbrella at all, but the surging fist aura almost completely penetrated into the umbrella. This was the difference between the 3 realms of martial arts and the 3 realms of martial arts taught by the old man surnamed Kui. After doing all this, Chen Pinggan clenched the vermilion blade strengthening gourd in his hand, ready to summon Chuyi and Shiwu to fight the enemy at any time. However, after the umbrella trembled for a while, black smoke with a stinky smell curled up. After it gradually dispersed, it became completely silent. Chen Pinggan was a little confused. Is it over? This weird oil paper umbrella must have some hidden secrets. Didn't it have any killing moves? For example, a ferocious and horrible otherworldly item with billowing black smoke and shaking the sky roaring? Chen Pinggan still remembered the wedding dress ghost that they met on the mountain path. She led them by the nose everywhere. The blind Taoist who was proficient in thunder method was not her opponent at all. If Wei Jin of the Wind Snow Temple had not broken the boundary with his sword and showed the demeanor of a sword fairy, Chen Pinggan would have been forced to use 2 wisps of sword qi. Then, he would not have had the chance to confront the young Kui Dong at the well. Chen Pinggan squatted on the ground and stared at the oil paper umbrella in a daze. After drinking some wine, he did not forget to lift the umbrella and shake it a few times. There was a slight sound of ashes pouring down from the umbrella. Chen Pinggan squatted there, scratching his head and drinking wine. He felt a little empty in his heart. In the bamboo house of Luopo Mountain, he was used to dying every day. Now, it was like drinking water after getting used to drinking hard liquor. However, Chen Pinggan silently comforted himself. No matter which scholar this oil paper umbrella was related to, or whether it was hidden by the otherworldly item after entering the house, the strange thing in the umbrella was definitely just a pawn who had crossed the river to explore the way. Therefore, he could not let his guard down. Therefore, Chen Pinggan stood up and sat at the table. With the help of the lamp, he controlled the small snowwind cone pen from the square-inch object. He took a deep breath and began to draw talismans. The talisman was still the demon suppression talisman, but the talisman paper was no longer yellow. It was a golden one. After drawing a talisman paper, Chen Pinggan habitually picked up the wine gourd and drank a big mouthful of wine. After a short rest, he waited for his breath to stabilize before he dared to draw. On a stormy night, with a snowwind brush, Chen Pinggan, who was a little tipsy, drew like a god. Beside his hand was a vermilion sword cultivating gourd and 2 demon suppression talismans in the wooden box. Of course, there was also the Taoist Zhongshan's snoring on the bed. It was raining cats and dogs. Occasionally, the night sky would be torn apart by lightning and thunder. On a small hill not far from the old house, there was a middle-aged Daoist with a horsetail whisk in his hand. He looked gloomy as he spread his hand and looked over. A simple bronze coin suddenly broke into pieces. The middle-aged Daoist's face was gloomy. He endured the heartache and threw it away carelessly. He snorted and said, "A pair of bastards who are neither human nor ghost. They still want to put up a fight." Beside the middle-aged Daoist stood a tall man in thin clothes. He had thick eyebrows and big eyes. He allowed the rain to fall on his body. Occasionally, a golden light would flash in his eyes. There was a fist-sized seal box hanging on his waist. Seeing that the Daoist had gone for wool and come home shorn, he was a little impatient. He sneered and said, "If you still want to force your way in, then after this matter is done, it won't be a 50-50 split." The Taoist didn't want to be entangled in this matter. He let go and asked, "Who is that bearded swordsman? Why did he happen to visit the old house tonight?" The tall man sneered and said, "I heard that at the end of last year, a wanderer came to the colorful clothes country. He took care of a few weak otherworldly items with a good saber and became famous. Looking at his actions in this heavy rain, he showed the will of a fourth realm martial artist at most. If it was somewhere else, I would be afraid of him. Now that he's in my territory, he's not worth mentioning. When the time comes, you and I will take care of him together. You can make him into a puppet. I won't stop you, but the saber must be mine." The middle-aged Taoist waved his horsetail whisk, and mist rose from his body. His Taoist robe that was soaked by the rain instantly dried. He smiled and said, "Then it's settled." The tall man hesitated for a moment and asked, "Has the backer of the old house really lost power in the Divine Grandeur sect?" The middle-aged Taoist nodded and said with a smile, "The news about you, the mountain god, is too limited." The tall man's face was gloomy. He gritted his teeth and said, "It's all because of the appearance of that old house. It set up a broken formation that the Divine Grandeur sect wouldn't let outsiders know. It slowly ate away the spiritual energy within 100 miles. Over the past 100 years, my golden body had gradually decayed. Now, who would still want to treat me as a mountain god? I'm even worse than the lord of the land in other places. If I don't take revenge, I won't be able to relieve the hatred in my heart." The middle-aged Taoist nodded and comforted him. In fact, the mountain god temple here, which was the place where the man's golden body was worshipped, was originally an obscene temple that hadn't been conferred by the imperial court of the colorful robes kingdom. In addition, there were unmarked graves all over the place, and filthy air covered the sky. After the tall man accepted the incense and became the mountain god by chance, he sped up the process of the decay of the mountains and rivers in order to cultivate. The old house, which was the center of the formation, only absorbed the yin-evil qi and didn't consume the spiritual energy of the mountains and rivers. Instead, it maintained the balance of the mountains and rivers. However, it was useless to say more about these inside stories. The middle-aged Taoist who had fallen into the devil's path and the mountain god who didn't walk the righteous path knew that neither of them was a good person. The tall man suddenly asked sternly, "I want to take back all the territories. You covet the female ghost's body. Once you control it, you'll be like a tiger that has grown wings. Then, what is that guy planning? Is there a rare magic treasure in this old house that I don't know about?" The middle-aged Taoist laughed and said, "I don't know about this. Let's ask him together later." The tall man understood in his heart, "That's great." The Daoist looked around. Outside of the soil, there were mostly cliffs and pale scenery. There were only a few green trees, but he knew that this was all thanks to the female ghost's leisure. Only then could the soil have a little bit of spring. The female ghost, no matter if it was fate or temperament, was really rare. After the Taoist came here personally, he was more determined to get it. The Taoist looked at the old house and said, "The tree is swaying. The business is over." He didn't expect that the lewd mountain god was also a scholar. He smiled and said, "The tree is like this. How can a man endure it?" The cultivator and the god looked at each other and smiled. In the second courtyard of the old house, one side of the side room was dark. The two scholars should have fallen asleep. However, the room of the young man with the case and the young Taoist was still lit. Before the old woman knocked on the door, the man who was addicted to wine had smelled the fragrance of wine. He kept knocking on the door and said, "Is there any wine to drink? If there is, then it's the wine that can exchange your life. I guarantee that you will make a profit." The old woman didn't stop him. She only said, "You guys arrange your own rooms." Chen Pingan put down his wine gourd and opened the door. He saw an unfamiliar man with a rough appearance. The big bearded swordsman glanced at Chen Pingan. He asked casually, "Little kid, listening to your walking and breathing, you should be a martial artist. Now you have no second realm?" Chen Pingan smiled and said, "I have been learning martial arts from my elders since young. This is my first time traveling the world. I still don't know the division of realms." Looking back, the Taoist Zhongshan was already woken up. He was sitting by the bed and putting on his shoes. The big bearded swordsman stepped over the door and sat on the chair. He clicked his tongue and said, "You don't know the division of realms? Then you must be from a remote place. Then why is it that on this trip, our Aquarius continent's language is so fluent? A rural place in a small country wouldn't be able to learn this. Tell me, are you a ghost in human skin?" The swordsman unsheathed his saber. The saber light was dazzling. He glared at him and shouted, "Quickly tell me your name." "I, Zhao, don't kill nameless ghost." Chen Pinggan and Taoist Zhongshan looked at each other. Could it be that because of the heavy rain outside, this brother's brain was flooded with water? Ghost! Among the Qi cultivators, there were countless rogue cultivators. Even if they were monsters and plants, although discrimination was inevitable, it was far from being suppressed and hunted down. But ghost cultivators were an exception. Once they were discovered, almost everyone wanted to kill them. If it was said that birth, old age, sickness, and death were the cycle of the heavens, then the Qi cultivator's immortality was against the heavens. Then it was human nature to be buried in the ground after death. Ghost cultivators violated this principle and belonged to the evil path that everyone had the right to punish. Immortals live to cultivate, gods die to teach. Ghost cultivators were the exception. They were not living cultivators when they were alive, nor were they the gods of mountains and rivers that were conferred by the imperial court after they died. Therefore, the real Taoist masters of Dragon Tiger Mountain, who had profound Taoist skills, pointed their peachwood swords at the evil ghosts that wreaked havoc everywhere, far more than the spirits that hid in the streets. The more people came and went in the hubs of prosperous trade, the less the term spirit had an obvious positive and negative meaning. In fact, in some big countries, especially the powerful dynasties that had deeply rooted forces on the mountains, even the common people were used to living with those strange spirits in the world. It was said that there were many small spirits that helped women wash their hair, dress up, apply rouge, and fold clothes. They had wings and flew here and there with great familiarity. And they loved their masters forever. Chen Pinggan did not defend himself at all. He took off the wine gourd and drank a mouthful of wine silently. The bearded man was stunned. His throat moved slightly. Obviously, the wine worm in his stomach was causing trouble. He suddenly lost his momentum and stretched out his hand shamelessly. "As long as you treat me to wine, I'll turn a blind eye to you even if you are a ghost. As long as I don't see you committing any crimes on the spot, everything is negotiable." Chen Pinggan shook his head and did not give it to him. The bearded swordsman sighed and said, "You little brat, you are dishonest and cunning. You are obviously bullying me because I am a righteous master." Taoist Zhongshan quickly sat down and helped to smooth things over. He chatted with the bearded man in the language of the Aquarius continent. The beauty of the embroidery building in the old house leaned over there. A man and a woman snuggled together. The woman wore a dark green dress with a huge hem, not revealing her legs and embroidered shoes. The man whispered softly, "I hope the lady's clothes are warm in the cold spring. I hope the lady's frown is smoothed out. I hope the lady opens the window every time to see the bright moon in the sky, with clear water and green mountains." The extremely ugly woman babbled and whimpered, as if she was crying and complaining. The hem of her dress billowed like waves. The old woman walked in the dark corridor and sighed quietly. Finally, she sat beside the corridor pillar where the lanterns were hung. Year after year, day after day, the old woman touched her withered face. She had long forgotten how long it had been since she last looked at herself in the mirror. If she was like this, then the lady who had not left the embroidery building for 100 years must be even more like this. The man chatted with the young Taoist. Suddenly, he pressed his hand on the hilt of his sword. He was no longer joking. He said seriously, just like the rumors in the nearby town, the demonic aura came from the backyard of the old house. What a strong demonic aura. No wonder the feng shui of this place would disappear. It might be the old witch of the sixth realm. "Kids, I am going to kill the demon now. You two should retreat if you see something wrong. Don't take it lightly. This place is extremely dangerous. It is not a place for you two to get involved in." The bearded swordsman thought for a moment. "We don't have to retreat now. We don't want to be targeted by the old witch of the old house. Even if I lose, I will try my best to delay them. When the time comes, listen to my news. Don't hesitate to run." Then, the man saw the bearded swordsman took a deep breath and pulled out his saber from its scabbard. Saber light flashed. The man reached out his hand to brush away the dust in the brazier and grabbed a piece of burning charcoal. He held it in his hand and wiped the saber. Sparks flew everywhere, setting off the saber's sharpness. Even if the odds of winning were not high, the man was full of heroic spirit. Chen Pinggan handed over the wine pot. He looked solemn. "Warrior." The man smiled and shook his head. He suddenly stood up with the sword in his hand. "I am just drinking to satisfy my cravings. Actually, killing big demons and protecting the Tao is 1,000 times better than drinking wine." In the rainy night, the man pushed the door open and strode to the backyard. He flicked his wrist and the light of the sword shone, illuminating the surroundings. The bearded swordsman looked up and said loudly, "Shu Yuanxia is here. Please enlighten me." The Taoist Zhongshan picked up the peachwood sword with the demon listening bell. He said to Chen Pinggan in a low voice, "I will help him kill the demon." "Chen Pinggan, you are a pure warrior. Before you reach the fourth realm, you are not suitable to deal with big demons and otherworldly items. You stay here. If there is a need, I will call you." Chen Pinggan nodded and said, "Okay." Chen Pinggan waited for a moment after the Daoist priest nimbly flew out of the room. He did not choose to stay where he was and observe the situation. Instead, he walked out of the room. Through the curtain of rain, he looked at the room opposite with his bare hands. "I know it's you." The room had been dark for a long time. A door slowly opened and the scholar surnamed Chu walked out. He had a slender figure and was holding the torch that had been extinguished by the rain. He had a smile on his face. After meeting Chen Pinggan's eyes, the scholar twitched the corner of his mouth. He raised his arm and rubbed the torch with his palm. In an instant, the torch was lit. He gently poked the end of the torch into the pillar in the corridor. "You talk the least, but you are the smartest. Of course, you are also quite capable to be able to get rid of the White Deer Taoist's copper coin ghost. However, a third realm ghost is just like that. Young man, don't be arrogant because of this." Chen Pinggan did not say a word. His thin figure disappeared without a sign. The scholar was slightly stunned. A figure flashed through the curtain of rain between the rooms in a flash and pounced on him. Some of the more arrogant scholars did not even have time to react before they were hit in the head by a fist aura. The fist aura was like a white rainbow hanging in the air. The fist aura quickly hit their heads and sent them flying. They broke through the door and the wall. The scholar fell into the corridor outside and finally hit a thick pillar. The pillar behind his back cracked and a small spider web appeared. The scholar barely managed to stop himself from retreating. He kept vomiting blood, his spirit was severely shaken, and his face was full of horror. It was not only the strength of the fist aura that was shocking, but also the combination of the fist aura and the fist aura. When the fist aura hit him, it was like a ghost whip in the hands of an immortal. It was a natural restraint. There was a loud bang. This time, the punch hit the scholar's neck. The scholar and the pillar fell backward together. The scholar was covered in blood and tears from the two punches. His face was ferocious and his clothes were torn. He was about to show his true form and did not care about the layout anymore. Then, he heard a strange word. "First day." 217. After being in Jianghu for so long, who didn't have some hidden skills and treasures? When the scholar Chu heard the name Chu Yi, his heartstrings were shaken. He knew that something was wrong. Perhaps this was the youth's trump card, but he couldn't sense where the danger came from. The flustered scholar Chu's mind raced. He gritted his teeth and slid out a greenish-white ball from his sleeve. It was flowing with colorful lights. One could tell at a glance that it was not an ordinary object. After the scholar Chu clenched his fist, the ball melted like a candle in fire. A viscous liquid as thick as mercury quickly spread from his arm and quickly covered his whole body. The next moment, the slender man was wearing a pure white armor. The heart protection mirror in the middle was shining brightly. It was the style of the radiant armor. In the secular world's Taoist temples, The heavenly kings and spiritual officials wore this armor. It contained the meaning of righteousness. If he didn't feel that his life was in danger, the scholar Chu wouldn't be willing to use this priceless armor pill even if he recovered his true body. The armor pill was the most precious treasure of the military. Its price was not the most expensive, only more expensive. Moreover, it had always been priceless. It was usually jointly forged by the mechanical masters of the school of Moism and the Talisman sect. It was usually compressed into a fist-sized pill. It didn't take up much space and was convenient to carry. Once on the battlefield, it could be watered with vital energy. The scholar Chu had the armor pill to protect his body. The surface of the armor emitted a layer of rippling pure white halo, like the scene of a snowy moonlit night. The scholar stood up. He was much calmer than before. He smiled bitterly. "Young man, you've caused me a lot of trouble. Originally, this radiant armor was to prevent the result of uneven distribution of the spoils. At that time, it could be used to resist the joint attack of the white deer Taoist and the mountain god. Now that it has been exposed, they will definitely be more careful. What should I do?" Although his words were light, the scholar didn't let down his guard. He was still puzzled. Why did the youth not say anything after shouting Chu Yi? There was no sword out of the scabbard, leaving the wooden box and flying over from the opposite side of the room. There were also no reinforcements hidden in the dark. The scholar Chu was puzzled. The taciturn young man in front of him was definitely not a guy who liked to joke around. 2 punches had almost forced him to reveal his true form. Perhaps even the big-bearded swordsman, who had recklessly gone to kill the great demon, would not have been able to do so with his realm 4 strength. Although Chu Yi did not appear. However, Scholar Chu was still able to conclude that as long as this Chu Yi showed up, he would definitely be an expert that couldn't be underestimated. Either that, or he would possess a powerful offensive magical weapon. Chen Pinggan was a little annoyed. He slapped the blade-strengthening gourd on his waist heavily. Now, the Chu Yi in the gourd had a sudden change in temperament. Previously, it was grumpy and often made Chen Pinggan suffer. However, after leaving Luopa Mountain, it became lazy and did not move at all. It did not even have the mood to be angry with Chen Pinggan. After Chen Pinggan patted the sword-cultivating gourd again, it still did not move and hovered in the void of the sword-cultivating gourd. However, the dark green flying sword 15 hummed and took the initiative to communicate with Chen Pinggan. It probably wanted to say that if Chu Yi did not want to fight, 15 could do it for him. After the Acupores were enlightened, the 2 flying swords were like children who did not know how to speak. They already had spiritual intelligence, but it was not high. They acted more on instinct. They could clearly sense Chen Pinggan's thoughts, but they often could not communicate well. Moreover, Chen Pinggan could only vaguely know their emotions, so it was still not easy for them to communicate. Seeing Chen Pinggan's action, Scholar Chu immediately focused his gaze, only to see the vermilion wine gourd. Its luster was dim, and there was nothing strange about it. He couldn't see the slightest hint of any mystical phenomenon. In truth, when they had first met in the rain outside the old residence, Scholar Chu had carefully sized up the youth with the box and the young Daoist. At that time, he had felt that they shouldn't be some otherworldly expert. The imperial court of the colorful clothes kingdom was not high and the water was deep. There was no crouching tiger or hiding dragon. The likes of Taoist white deer were already grandmasters and immortals who were awe-inspiring. It was not surprising that Scholar Chu was the dragon that had crossed the river and stirred up trouble. This made sense. He left the mansion and went south from the ancient Yu kingdom to the colorful clothes kingdom for the things in the old house. Even if he was certain of success, he still planned slowly. He first drew in Taoist white deer and the mountain deity of lust. The 3 parties each took what they needed. Then, he befriended the son of the aristocratic family surnamed Liu and lured him to travel to the mountain. He told his 2 allies that he did not hesitate to take the risk and first investigate the situation. He relied on the scholarly and official aura that Scholar Liu had been imbued with since childhood to conceal the faint demonic aura on him. His real purpose was to explore the ley lines that the formation relied on so that he could fish in troubled waters during the battle and steal the magic weapon. Then, He would not be too entangled with Taoist white deer and the mountain deity. Relying on the unexpected armor pill to protect himself, he flew far away and returned to the ancient Yu kingdom to continue his cultivation. As for the appearance of the big-bearded swordsman, it was just a spur-of-the-moment idea. He spread rumors in the nearby towns and added fuel to the fire. He made the old house seem even more demonic and evil. In fact, for 100 years, it was true that the old house was filled with dense yin qi. However, it had not harmed the people or been tyrannical. The purpose was to make the water in the pond even more turbid so that it would be easier for him to escape. Even if the big-bearded swordsman used up some of the old house's master's cultivation, it would be a good thing. It would be even better if it could last until Taoist white deer and the mountain deity arrived for a chaotic battle. The big-bearded swordsman, who was warm-hearted, did not know the inside story. He followed the rumors and drank 2 big bowls of strong liquor in the nearest town. His blood rushed to his head and he happened to feel that the heavy rain was strange. He quickly set off to slay the demon. Among them, the torch that the mountain deity personally smeared with ointment and the oil paper umbrella that Taoist white deer hid the copper coins and ghosts. They were all inconspicuous objects that required a lot of thought. One of them was to help the nominal master of this place, the lascivious mountain deity, to check the Qi inside the old house at a close distance. The other one was to help Taoist white deer set up traps and find an opportunity to appear. From the inside to the outside, he destroyed the means used to defend the old house against external enemies. For example, the dilapidated green word talisman of the Divine Grandeur sect and the shadow wall with a trace of authentic Taoism left. These methods helped the old house to withstand many insidious attacks. None of the 3 parties in the alliance was easy to deal with. However, this was normal. If not, in the wild where the weak were preyed on by the strong, they would have died long ago and become the stepping stone of other ferocious cultivators. Were there Qi trainers who stood aloof from worldly affairs? Of course, there were. For example, in this old house, the male and female owners, as well as the old woman, had lived in seclusion for 100 years. What happened to them was a miserable situation that everyone coveted. Unwilling to complicate matters, Scholar Chu chose to take a step back. He smiled and said, "Young Master Chen, there is no enmity between us. Why do we have to fight to the death? As long as young Master Chen is willing to leave the old house tonight, I will definitely treat you with good wine whenever you pass by the ancient Yu kingdom in the future. Even if young Master Chen wants to drink in the ancient Yu kingdom's palace, pick a snowy night, I can bring you wine and sit on the roof of the palace with you. We can drink and admire the snow without worrying that the emperor of the ancient Yu kingdom will be angry and chase us away." To tell the truth, although Scholar Chu's origin was not righteous, after he cultivated a human body, he seemed to have experienced something. His aura was extraordinary and he stood out from the crowd. He was even more rich and noble than the elites of the rich and powerful families. Rome wasn't built in a single day. He must have had a unique opportunity to be able to be so graceful and elegant today. Chen Pinggan finally spoke. He asked, "I heard that the emperor of the ancient Yu kingdom has the surname Chu. You have the same surname too. Are you related?" Scholar Chu hesitated for a moment. As if to express his sincerity, he nodded and smiled. "We are somewhat related, but we are not related by blood. In short, we rely on each other and guard against each other. It is more complicated and hard to explain." The word Chu meant that the upper part of the forest and the lower part of the horse. The word horse could be used to explain the word foot. The 2 trees were the forest and there were feet under the tree. Scholar Chu used this as his surname. It went without saying that he was most likely a spirit of an ancient tree. It was just that Chen Pinggan's literacy was still at the level of a rough understanding of literature and ink, with occasional understanding. He was far from reaching the level of being able to accurately understand words. After all, he was far from being as knowledgeable as Kui Shi or Wei Ba. Chen Pinggan sized up the armor on the scholar with the surname Chu and made up his mind not to use 15 first. He wanted to make use of this opportunity to test his fist skills so as to ascertain the depth of his 3rd realm. He then asked, "Which realm are you at?" Scholar Chu smiled. "Just the 5th realm. Of course, He was being modest. How could an immortal who was only one step away from the middle 5 realms be just? One had to know that cultivators in the middle 5 realms of the immortal clans that started with the word sect were also extremely precious existences. They were either elders with noble statuses or deacons with real power. If the sects were like this, then there was no need to talk about small countries like the ancient Yu Kingdom and the beautiful Robes Kingdom. However, Scholar Chu's slightly self-satisfied modesty sounded like a genuine just to the simple-minded Chen Pinggan. Was this the great demon of the 5th realm that Daoist Zhongshan mentioned? Chen Pinggan gently twisted his wrist and grinned. He could not defeat the female ghost in the bridal dress, but this guy in a tortoise shell could really be used as practice. It would be best if he could kill him, but it would not be a loss even if he could not kill him. After all, he still had his flying sword with him. Not 1, but 2. Back then, Chen Pinggan had dared to tease the mountain-moving ape of Xingyang Mountain like he was walking a dog after just a few days of practicing. Not to mention his strength, in terms of courage and boldness, he was indeed much stronger than the martial artists in the world. Of course, once he chose to fight with his life on the line, he had to be careful and cautious. This was also Chen Pinggan's strength. Scholar Chu said helplessly, "Why do you still want to fight?" Chen Pinggan gave a straightforward answer. "No. If I defeat you, my friend and that machete man will be in danger." Scholar Chu's eyes turned gloomy. Even a clay bodhisattva would have some anger, let alone a powerful local snake like him who was used to the splendor of the world. "Young man, you won't cry until you see the coffin? I'm telling you clearly that there are 2 people outside the old house who are eyeing us covetously. Do you really want to get involved? Do you really think I'm afraid of you?" Chen Pinggan's answer made Scholar Chu furious. "Whether you're afraid of me or not has nothing to do with whether I fight you or not." Chen Pinggan took a deep breath. The reason why he had delayed for so long was not that Chen Pinggan wanted to show off, but that he wanted to confirm the intentions of the 2 little ancestors in the blade-strengthening gourd. This would determine how he should fight this battle. Flying Sword Chu, whose original name was Fengju, appeared in the ancestral house in Mud Bottle Alley. It was like a small white rainbow hanging in the air. Although the body of the sword was slender, it was full of majestic momentum and showed off its sharpness without any concealment. On the other hand, Flying Sword 15, which traded with Old Yang, had a slightly different momentum. The divine will of the flying sword leaned more toward tranquility. Its movements in the blade-strengthening gourd also stopped abruptly and flew abruptly. It came and went in a hurry and was extremely fast. Every time, it would hover at the inner wall of the blade-strengthening gourd and almost hit it. It was completely different from Chu Yi's craziness in the blade-strengthening gourd. Therefore, Chen Pinggan came to a rough conclusion that Fengju, or rather, the forkbow flying sword he had arbitrarily named Chu Yi, was sharper and sturdier than 15. However, its flaws were also very obvious. It was slow, and it was not easy for Chen Pinggan to completely control it. Therefore, it caused every strike to be inaccurate. If they were in a stalemate, especially when they had the upper hand, they could have Chu Yi show up and run around randomly. After all, they were not afraid of breaking anything. But in a dangerous situation, they still needed 15, who was docile and swift, to help deliver a fatal blow and make the final decision. Of course, the natal flying sword was very powerful. It was the foundation that all swordsmen in the world dreamed of having. Once they were lucky enough to have it, they would cherish it more than their own life. It was also an existence that gave the rest of the Qi cultivators a headache. However, there were 2 problems with any natal flying sword. First, it was not easy to get. Countless treasures of heaven and earth were needed to refine the sword. Second, it was known for its amazing killing power. It had a kind of indescribable deterrence without leaving the residents of Qi. However, once it left the residents of Qi to kill the enemy, as long as there was a little bit of damage, such as a chip on the blade or a crack on the body of the sword, it would be a huge expense to repair a damaged natal flying sword. Therefore, there was a saying on the mountain. The rich were also swordsmen, the poor were also swordsmen. Even if they lost everything overnight, they were still swordsmen. This was the reason why Chen Pinggan asked Chu Yi to fight first. He was worried that 15 would fight for the first time officially and then it would end quickly. Both sides had their own insistence. Since they could not come to an agreement, they could only meet for real. The scholar surnamed Chu, who was really an ancient tree spirit, stretched out a finger and knocked on the shining heart-protecting mirror in front of his chest. "Aren't your fists very hard? Come, hit me." This set of rare armor pills that cost 3,000 snow coins is from the ancient Yu Kingdom's royal family's earthly treasury. "Chen, if you can break it, I'll admit that you're capable." Chen Pinggan would not stand on ceremony with him. With a tap of his toes, the tiles on the ground shattered instantly. It was enough to show how fast he was charging forward. There was an old saying that it was not unreasonable to say that trees die when they move and people live when they move. Although the scholar tree spirit was a 5th realm chi cultivator and had a strong physique, he was indeed not proficient in twisting and turning and close combat. Therefore, he paid a huge price to obtain the armor pills as a life-saving talisman at a critical moment. The scholar surnamed Chu had an innately strong physique. Coupled with the precious armor covering his body, he gathered his chi and focused his mind and calmly received the youth's punch. After the punch, the force was so strong that the heart-protecting mirror caved in by an inch. The scholar surnamed Chu flew out and crashed into the outermost courtyard wall of the old house. However, this time, he did not look embarrassed at all. Instead, the wall behind him shattered with a loud bang, revealing a shocking and terrifying scene. Inside the wall were not bricks but entangled tree roots that were slowly wriggling. The scholar surnamed Chu patted the dust off his shoulders and laughed mockingly. "Is that all you've got? If you don't have a 6th realm hero's guts, even if I stood still from the start and allowed you to punch me hundreds and thousands of times, it would still be very difficult for Mr. Chen to shatter the armor pills in one go." The 4th, 5th, and 6th realms of martial artists weren't limited to body tempering but to chi refinement. Hence, they were called Master Realm. Each realm dealt with the soul, spirit, and guts. Once one reached large success, one's combat strength would increase layer by layer. Not only would it nourish the body, but one would also have more confidence when facing chi refinement warriors. Especially when dealing with spirits and ghosts, one would be able to achieve twice the results with half the effort. Each time one attacked, the fist energy would be like the blazing sun, repelling all evil. The reason why Chen Pinggan did not pursue an attack was not because he was an arrow at the end of its flight. On the contrary, this punch was just a side dish that went with wine. Chen Pinggan was mainly shocked by the strange wall behind the scholar. Could it be that the walls of the entire old house were like this and were deeply rooted? In the backyard, there would be light flashing from time to time, illuminating the night sky. During this time, there would be the shouts of the bearded swordsman. The 3 yellow paper demon suppressing pagoda talismans had been used up. However, there were still 2 golden demon suppressing talismans hidden in Chen Pinggan's sleeves, as well as 2 distance shrinking talismans. Chen Pinggan muttered in his heart, "It's done." The previous few punches were all based on his body's agility. Actually, they were all direct attacks. However, Chen Pinggan was different this time. He took a very ancient stance and stepped out. His arms stretched out and he slowly clenched his fists. In an instant, Chen Pinggan's fist intent poured out like a flood. It could really pierce one's eyes. In the eyes of the scholar surnamed Chu, it was like a huge sun rising from the East Sea. It was extremely terrifying. God drum beating stance. The scholar surnamed Chu swallowed his saliva and thought to himself, "Should we sit down and have a chat? Why do I feel that even the armor might not be able to protect me?" The young man in front of him clearly had not reached the 3 realms of chi refinement. Why would he have such an unreasonable and vigorous fist intent? The scholar surnamed Chu wanted to retreat. At the very least, he should avoid the brunt of the attack. He should not stupidly allow the fist to smash into his body. Just as he was about to shift his position, the young man suddenly disappeared. In the blink of an eye, he was in front of the scholar. A fist smashed into his ribs that were covered by the armor pill. His momentum was fierce and his strength was great. The scholar surnamed Chu staggered to the side, but at the same time, he let out a sigh of relief. After taking a proper stance, the young man's fist intent was frightening, but his strength did not seem to have increased by much. The barefoot old man had once joked in the bamboo house of Luorpa Mountain. This old man's god drum-beating stance focused on the first punch. Once the first punch arrived, it would be guided by the spirit's will. After that, 10 or even 100 punches would naturally arrive. Therefore, the first punch had to hit the opponent. After that, the number of punches one could send out would depend on how long one could hold on. Therefore, in order to not miss with his first punch, Chen Ping'an did not hesitate to use a length contraction talisman. After that, Chen Ping'an's punches became faster and faster. His strength was only slightly stronger than before. He hammered into various parts of the scholar surnamed Chu's Qi realm. The armor pill shone brightly. Wherever Chen Ping'an's fist landed, the light would suddenly light up. It was indeed one of the best treasured treasures of the ancient Yu kingdom. Every time he tried to dodge, it seemed as if he was only half a step away, but he just couldn't dodge the punch. The scholar surnamed Chu, who had no power to fight back, took the 10th punch, and his face suddenly became deathly pale. Shoulders, chest, ribs, abdomen, back, head, temples, eyebrows, elbows, knees. There was no place that the young man's fist did not have a foothold. Chen Ping'an's punches were as fast as lightning. Most importantly, in the scholar surnamed Chu's eyes, the young man's gaze was calm and his breathing was steady. His heart was too calm. Every step and every punch was matched perfectly. It was as if he was an old monster that had lived for hundreds of years. After 15 punches, Chen Ping'an's fist was already a bloody mess. Some white bones could be seen. However, why would Chen Ping'an care about this pain that was neither painful nor itchy? Compared to the pain of having his 10 fingers smashed by a hammer bit by bit, the pain of having his bones crushed inch by inch, compared to the pain of having to peel off his skin and pull out his tendons, Chen Ping'an felt that this pain could be considered a comfortable enjoyment. The scholar surnamed Chu had already revealed half of his true form. He was 10 feet tall. His eyes were green and his face was covered with green veins. Under the armor, one could see signs of his bulging muscles. He was like an old tree. He used his arms to block in front of his face. He was sent flying again and again. He shouted with all his might, "Daoist white deer, mountain god Qin, there's a change in the situation. Come and help me." On the hillside outside the old residence, the lewd mountain god's expression changed slightly. The flame from the torch that the scholar surnamed Chu had inserted into the corridor pillar was quickly stripped of its sparks. The sparks of flame floated in all directions. Although most of them dissipated quickly, there were still some small balls of fire that floated through the corridor towards the courtyard. They allowed the mountain god to observe the situation inside the old residence through the flames that were like his own eyes. Therefore, the mountain god could clearly see the entire process of the scholar surnamed Chu and the young man's fight. This made him a little troubled. He was not troubled about whether to help, but when to enter the scene so that he could reap the most benefits. He could not be bothered to help the scholar in his hour of need before his armor was broken. If he killed the young man and helped the scholar keep his armor, he would be looking for trouble. The middle-aged Daoist holding the horsetail whisk suddenly said, "The sharpness of the saber of the bearded swordsman is beyond imagination. If I don't help now, I'm afraid the female ghost's true body will be hurt. So, will mountain god Qin follow me or continue to watch from the sidelines?" The lewd mountain god laughed and said, "Since we're allies, we should advance and retreat together. There's no such thing as retreating at the last minute." The Daoist laughed and threw the snow-white horsetail whisk forward. When it was about to hit the ground, a tall white deer appeared. The Daoist rode on the white deer and sped forward quickly. His Daoist robe fluttered in the wind. Fortunately, there were no woodcutters or commoners nearby. Otherwise, they would probably kowtow and call him an immortal. The lewd mountain god did not use any spells. He simply took a step forward and walked to the side of the white deer and the Daoist. The white deer ran like the wind and soon arrived outside the old house. The middle-aged Daoist rushed up and the white deer instantly turned back into the horsetail whisk and flew back to its owner's hand. The Daoist laughed and said, "Brother Chu, I'll help you kill the enemy." Chen Ping'an had already reached his limit after throwing out 20 punches. Unfortunately, he still could not break the armor. Although the scholar with the surname Chu was beaten until he was bleeding from his 7 orifices and his soul was shaken. His true body was completely exposed and almost the entire corridor was destroyed by the two of them. The scholar with the surname Chu had only lost the ability to fight. He still had the strength to protect himself with his talent and radiant armor. He would not be shaken to death by the young man's punch. Then, the daoist with the horsetail whisk descended from the sky. Chen Pinggan had just retracted his fist and lightly patted the blade-strengthening gourd at his waist. A ray of white light flew out of the small red gourd and pierced the armor's heart-protecting mirror that had just caved in. Almost all the colorful fireflies of the armor pill gathered on the heart-protecting mirror. The armor let out a soft sound of porcelain shattering. The ray of white light bounced back and flashed away, disappearing without a trace. The dying scholar with the surname Chu panicked, but soon his face was filled with ecstasy. The armor was not pierced and he was not dead, but in the next moment, he felt the space between his brows go cold, and then his robust figure collapsed and fell backwards. At the moment of his death, he spoke fiercely in exasperation. "You've successively destroyed the foundation of my grand Tao. Just you wait." After saying this, the scholar with the surname Chu who had fallen to the ground turned into a large piece of green withered wood and decayed into ashes. The armor that had lost its owner also returned to its round shape. Chen Pinggan frowned. It turned out that after Chu Yi, a wisp of dark green light swept out from the gourd. It was much faster than the white sword light from before. One after the other, it took advantage of the gap between the treasured armor's spiritual energy to defend the heart-protecting mirror. The second flying sword easily penetrated between Scholar Chu's eyebrows. Standing on the high wall of the old house, the mountain god of lust exclaimed, "Natal flying sword." He turned his head and took a big step out. His figure quickly appeared more than 10 miles away. The cold wind blew and he was sweating profusely. Damn it, sword immortal. Daoist White Deer, who had just touched the ground and landed in the middle of the veranda, jumped up from the ground and ran away without saying a word. He threw out his horsetail whisk in the air and the white deer landed on the ground. Daoist White Deer rode on its back and fled in panic. Chen Pinggan was a little stunned. He stood in the same place, confused. He thought to himself, "I'm just a layman who has practiced boxing for less than 2 years. How did I become a sword immortal? I'm not even a sword cultivator." 218. In the backyard of the old house, outside the embroidery building, a fierce battle was going on. Pinbook Net the big-bearded swordsman, who had traveled all the way here just to kill demons, did not have a high martial arts realm, but the saber in his hand was a very high-quality weapon. After injecting his genuine chi, the saber in his hand shone with red light and the faint sound of wind and thunder. It was unstoppable. The old woman who had been guarding the third courtyard turned out to be a chi cultivator of the third realm who had been hiding her strength. However, she was old and weak, so she was still no match for the big-bearded swordsman and the saber. After more than 10 rounds, she was knocked unconscious by the back of the saber. With a kick, she crashed into the side room and fainted. Originally, the old woman was not so weak. However, she had been in the confinement for a long time and had been contaminated by the evil spirit gathered by the formation for a long time. Although she was not an otherworldly ghost cultivator, she was naturally afraid of the masculine chi of the saber. Moreover, the big-bearded swordsman had traveled all over the world and was very experienced in fighting. The old woman's rapid defeat was indeed reasonable. The last person to enter the courtyard was the owner of the old house. At first, the owner of the old house chose to fight the enemy alone. He landed in the courtyard where the beauty was leaning and picked a dusty long sword. The body of the sword was as cool as water. When fighting with the swordsman, the sword was light and agile. He did not fight with the saber head-on. Every time he attacked, he directly stabbed the vital chi residence of the big-bearded swordsman. The tip of the sword emitted green light, which brought a trace of sad but beautiful fireflies in the rain. When the big-bearded swordsman attacked, he had the demeanor of a fierce warrior on the battlefield. Every time he attacked, he was fast and fierce. His moves were not complicated, nor were they exquisite. Every attack was clean and neat, and he could draw back and release his saber freely. If he did not attack, he would be seriously injured. The big-bearded swordsman still had some strength to fight against the man in black's riding sword technique. When he saw some clues, the man attacked more fiercely because he was a little angry. He scolded, "You bastard, you are obviously from a righteous immortal family. Why don't you fight for the great Tao and immortality? Why do you degrade yourself? In the end, you become a half-human and half-ghost helper. You favor this female ghost and make the area hundreds of miles desolate. Don't you think you deserve to die?" The bearded man shouted angrily. He held the saber with both hands and chopped down heavily. The saber hit the man's sword, and the man and the sword were pushed back a few feet. The young but white-haired man slid all the way back, and the raindrops under his feet splashed everywhere. When he finally stood up, he swallowed a mouthful of blood that rushed up to his throat. The haggard man twisted his wrist and flicked his sword. Instantly, countless raindrops near the tip of the sword were shattered. The shattering sound was like firecrackers in spring. The bearded man took a heavy step forward with a saber in one hand. His entire arm was shrouded in a radiant light. The bearded man pointed at the man and glared at him. "Buddhists say that repent before you're saved. You bastard who deceives your master and destroys your ancestors. Why aren't you retreating? Do you really think I don't dare to kill you as well?" It was the first time that the man spoke tonight. Although his voice was hoarse like a stone grinding a blunt knife, his temperament was elegant and his expression was calm. Not only did he not speak ill of him, he even joked, "Buddhists also say that if you put down the butcher's knife, you'll become a Buddha immediately." The bearded man looked around and raised his head to glance at the closed door of the beauty lounge on the second floor. After retracting his gaze, he sneered, "Oh, you still have the mood to talk nonsense with me. It seems that you have something to rely on. That's right. With your background and the cultivation of a chi cultivator at the bottom of the 5 states, you might have already run a large and dirty family business in the past 100 years. Otherwise, the gods of the mountains and rivers nearby would not have turned a blind eye to what you've done. If I'm not wrong, although you definitely don't have the face to acknowledge your ancestors, you've done a lot of shady business outside. That's why you're able to intimidate others and make them not dare to touch you at all." Speaking of this, the bearded man was extremely angry. His face was like the angry eyes of a heavenly king in a temple statue. He said with a thunderous voice, "Yes or no?" The man holding the long sword smiled but did not speak. Deep in his eyes, there was some disappointment. The bearded man said sternly, "I've given you a chance to be a human again. If you don't want it, then don't blame me for being ruthless in killing demons." Before the bearded man took out his knife, the man sighed and felt a little guilty. Then he bit his finger and wrote a rune on the sword with his own blood. He wrote a Qing Ci Dan script. Qing Ci Dan script was one of the instruments of Taoism. It was said that in ancient times, it could be used to write to gods and spirits. It could reach the heavens and connect heaven and earth. Once the sincerity was accepted by the gods, all kinds of supernatural powers would descend on the body. For example, the Qing Ci written to the gods of the Thunder sect. Once the gods showed up, they could even hold thunder and lightning in their hands and protect themselves with a golden body. For a short period of time, they would be like the gods of the Thunder sect. No wonder there's a remnant of the Qing Ci Dan script on the screen wall. You're actually an official disciple of the Divine Grandeur sect. You can't redeem yourself even if you die 100 times. The bearded man was so angry that he almost stomped his feet. He swung his knife with all his strength. Under the bright light, the whole yard was as bright as day. For him, demons and ghosts haunted the human world. No matter how outrageous their tyrannical behavior was, the bearded man, who was used to seeing strange and tragic things, would not be too shocked. That was because it was the nature of demons and ghosts. It would be strange if they were kind to people. Therefore, the bearded man had always tried his best to kill them. He would not be so angry like today. However, a chi cultivator changed his evil ways and bullied others. That was what the bearded man hated the most. The bearded man was so angry that his momentum was shocking. His knife was strong when he was angry. Moreover, That precious knife was a divine weapon that even grandmasters in Jianghu coveted. For a moment, the yard was filled with dazzling knife light and surging gang qi. Unfortunately, the rainwater that fell on the small yard was turned into powder in the air before it touched the green bricks. Although he had used the unique skill of his sect, the man in the old house was too dispirited and his skin was rotten. He was like an old man with one foot in the grave. His realm barely maintained at the threshold of the 5 states, but his qi was already very weak. Like a wide stream without much water, it was almost dried up. This also made the Qing Ci Dan script on the sword body to increase the attack power of the longsword very little. On the 2nd floor of the embroidery building, the female ghost in a green dress finally showed up. She covered her face with one hand and held the corridor pillar with the other. Following her appearance, on the other side of the yard wall, the ground of the yard, and the corridor pillar, tree roots as thick as an arm shot towards them like crossbow arrows. The bearded man, who had already gained the upper hand, was suddenly surrounded by danger. However, he was still not afraid. His body twisted and turned in the yard, dodging the tree roots and arrows. At the same time, he cut the hidden weapons that brushed past him with his knife. The man was bold and heroic. Although he was in danger, he laughed loudly and said, "Old witch, you are indeed a tree spirit and a ghost. You came at the right time. I will cut off all your roots. When the time comes, I will leave you with one breath and let you die under the scorching sun." A young Taoist rushed over from the corridor. There was a pair of yellow paper talisman pasted on his calves, which made him run like a gust of wind. It was dazzling. The young Taoist with a peachwood sword on his back ran and shouted, "Hero Shu, I am here to help you kill the demon." The bearded man's shoulder was hit by a tree root. His tall figure used the huge momentum to spin in the air and cut off the tree root with one knife. The tree root that fell to the ground was still flapping non-stop. As for the tree root that retracted back to the wall, black blood seeped out from the cut, emitting a fishy smell. Together with the gloomy rain, it made the yard full of miasma. Fortunately, the man's martial arts' true meaning was flowing non-stop. It was quite vigorous, like a layer of golden light protecting his body. Seeing the young Taoist coming over to join in the fun, the bearded man spat out a mouthful of blood and laughed angrily. "Little Taoist, I appreciate your kindness. However, don't be a hindrance. Quickly take your friend and leave the house. Just go to that small town and prepare some good wine to reward this Shu. This is a great help." The young Taoist was unwilling to leave. It was his duty to kill the demon and get rid of evil for the people. As a disciple of the Celestial Master's mansion of Longhu Mountain, even if they were estranged, even if they were separated by thousands of mountains and rivers, he, Zhong Shan, was still one of the 10 million candidates for the Celestial Master's position in the Zhong family. The talisman pasted on the young Taoist's calves was the godly travel talisman that he bought at a high price. It could last for about half an hour. The godly travel talisman, also known as the armored horse talisman, could help the user move like a galloping horse, like an ancient deity patrolling the wind. The godly travel talisman was thus listed as the 7th grade of the 9-rank talisman alchemy book. No matter how expensive it was worth it for the young Taoist who lacked combat strength and a weak physique. To catch bandits, first catch the ringleader. The Taoist Zhong Shan pinched the sword with 2 fingers and ran along the corridor. He looked up at the 2nd floor of the embroidered building and said, "Go." With a whoosh, the peachwood sword on his back flew out from the young Taoist's back. With the slight movement of his 2 fingers, the sword did not directly attack the female tree spirit on the pillar of the embroidered building. Instead, it made a big circle and drew a delicate arc. Finally, it went around the pillar and stabbed the female ghost's face from the side. Not only did the female ghost have to help her husband suppress the saber of the bearded swordsman downstairs, but she also had to deal with the peachwood sword whistling through the air. She did not have time to cover her ugly face with one hand. It turned out that half of her face was rotten with maggots crawling on it, and the bones were miserable. The only half of her face that was slightly intact was also cracked like porcelain. Such a disgusting appearance would frighten a timid mortal teacher to death on the spot. Several thumb-sized cyan branches broke out from the pillar and tightly wrapped around the peachwood sword that was only an inch away from nailing into her face. In an instant, the peachwood sword lit up with a soybean-sized silver talisman light, which rolled and flowed under the sword. A little spiritual light was the talisman's gall, which made the branches burn as if they were in a raging fire. The female ghost felt as if she was struck by lightning. She screamed heartbreakingly and quickly turned her neck, not daring to look at the spiritual light. She waved her sleeves, and the almost burnt branches wrapped the peachwood sword and threw it into the embroidered building's boudoir together. After the female ghost turned her head, because of her big movement, the blood clots and maggots on her face fell on the beauty's arm. The female ghost whimpered softly, not knowing whether it was because of pain or embarrassment. Inging. After seeing this scene, the man holding the sword softly cried out. He could not help but call out the female ghost's name. The man was heartbroken and said sadly, "You've gone too far. Why do you collude with the mountain god of lust and force us like this? Although my wife is a ghost, she has never harmed anyone. For more than 100 years, in addition to using my own chi and blood to maintain my wife's vitality, I have only used the old house as the formation eye to absorb the yin chi and evil chi within a radius of 300 miles. On the contrary, it is the mountain god of lust who takes the chi and chi of mountains and rivers for his own cultivation. One of you calls yourself a hero, and the other a Taoist. Why don't you go to trouble him, but come here aggressively?" Speaking of this, the man holding the sword laughed with grief and indignation. He said, "Because we are not human, and the one surnamed Qin is a mountain god. You think there is a clear distinction between good and evil?" The man holding the sword with rotten skin and little chi and blood left, lowered his head and stared at the snow-white sword light. Once upon a time, the sect was majestic with green mountains and clear waters, and red-crowned cranes were singing. It was a paradise. He used to practice swordsmanship there, and he was familiar with the Qing dynasty's treasured books. He was also a young talent who had the potential to reach the 5 states. But suddenly, a letter from home came to the mountain gate, saying that the girl who was his childhood sweetheart and matchmaker was seriously ill. Even the most famous doctor in the county city could not save her. The letter from home told him to focus on cultivation, because even if he went down the mountain, he would not be able to see the girl for the last time. At the end of the letter, his father also hinted that this marriage would not be an obstacle for him in the future. He burned the letter and went down the mountain with his sword. When he returned to his hometown, the girl was already dead. Stubbornly, he used a secret technique of the Shin'eo sect and wrote a soul-summoning talisman with his own blood. He took the girl's corpse and her remaining soul and rushed to the deep mountains and forests overnight. At sunrise, he hid in a cave, and at sunset, he hurried on his way, trying to find a place with strong yin qi, hoping to help her return her soul to Yang. In the next 100 years, he spent all his money, thought hard, and exhausted his cultivation to build an old house. He stole the wood core of an ancestral female elm in the ancient Yu kingdom, and used the evil secret technique of grafting flowers on wood to fuse the girl's soul with the wood core. Under her clothes, she had no feet, only the roots. The old house was not only to help her extend her life, but also to imprison her. In the embroidery house, they bowed to heaven and earth, and to their parents and elders. Finally, the couple bowed to each other, and from then on, they depended on each other. Only the girl's personal maid did not abandon them. She changed from a young girl with black hair to a white-haired old woman. The past was unbearable to recall. The man with the sword murmured, "If the world is like this, there is no meaning for us to live." The big-bearded swordsman stopped his saber and raised his hand high, making a gesture of truce. He asked in a low voice, "Is there any secret during this period?" The man smiled bitterly. "The deities of the lustful ancestral mountain have coveted the old house for a long time. At the beginning of spring this year, I knew that with my remaining cultivation, it would be difficult to resist the sinister probing of those sneaky people. I had to violate my conscience and oath, and wrote a secret letter to the sect, hoping that the sect could send a 5th state immortal to help intimidate the mountain deity temple. However, it was like a clay ox in the sea, and there was no news back until now. This is normal. The sect is already benevolent enough not to kill me. Who would want to get involved in such a filthy matter?" If I were on the mountain, I would probably want to go down the mountain and clean up the sect after hearing about such a scandal. Daoist Zhongshan came to the big-bearded swordsman and explained in a low voice, I don't have much time left with the divine travel talisman. If they are playing tricks, I will have to take my friends and retreat. However, Daoist Zhongshan suddenly smiled, but I think that man is right. The big-bearded swordsman was in a dilemma. People's hearts were full of evil, and their smiling faces were full of evil. If there was really a disciple of the divine grandeur sect who was willing to come here, even if it was only a second or third state outer sect cultivator, it could prove the innocence of the old house ghost man and the woman tree ghost. The divine grandeur sect was the leader of the Taoists in the Aquarius continent, and they had a Lord of Heaven as their pillar of strength. To put it bluntly, even a servant disciple who cleaned the stairs of the mountain gate would have more influence than the leader of a small sect outside. Although the battle had come to an end, the four of them still did not dare to be distracted. This was especially true for the woman from the embroidered tower who had stolen the core of the ancient elm tree. Before this, she had always been well protected by the master of the ancient house. However, in this battle, the bearded swordsman had cut off countless of her roots. She was also greatly frightened by the peachwood sword. Although she knew that this day would come sooner or later, when it really came, she still panicked. She only felt that she would always be a burden to her husband. The guilt in her heart grew stronger and stronger. Her heart was in a mess. It had been like this for 100 years. At this moment, two powerful auras appeared in the courtyard. One of them was wearing a Daoist robe, and he descended from the sky. For some reason, he did not go straight for the embroidered house, but chose to land there. Although the man and woman in the old house had heard the sounds of fighting, they were too busy dealing with the bearded swordsman to pay attention to what was going on. They only thought that the old woman had regained her consciousness and was trying to stop the scoundrel who had sneaked into the old house. Soon, the mountain god of lust and Daoist white deer came and left in a hurry. They also said strange things like natal flying sword and sword immortal, as if they had met a real mountain immortal. They did not dare to attack and hurriedly retreated. The big-bearded swordsman said softly, Little Daoist, go and take a look. Daoist Zhongshan was stunned. Although the big-bearded swordsman said it casually, the meaning in his eyes was that he should leave this place as soon as possible. The young Daoist could not say a word. He was agitated and sad. He was glad that he had finally met a fellow Daoist who was willing to sacrifice his life to get rid of evil and defend Taoism. This was the person he wanted to be the most in his life. The sad thing was that he was always so useless and mediocre. The young Daoist did not speak. He silently rode the peachwood sword back to the embroidered house. He held it in his hand, and with the help of the teleport talisman on his leg, he turned around and left quickly. The swordsman in the courtyard frowned and pondered. He did not know whether the change was good or bad. Did the God Grandeur sect really send their disciples here? The woman was worried about his health. She was already at the end of her rope, and this battle was like a drum that urged her to die. She could no longer care about her manners and walked forward slowly. Her huge body, which was covered by the green dress and the tall embroidered house, was revealed for the first time. The beauty lounge on the second floor was broken, and the woman who was standing on a huge tree stump fell down in the courtyard. Behind her was a large section of the old tree root. She reached out her trembling hands and held the man's face. She only hated that she could not speak. The man comforted her softly, "Don't be afraid. Maybe the sect really sent someone to help." Seeing this, the bearded swordsman sighed and leaned his long knife on the ground. He thought that even if the husband and wife in front of him were really evil ghosts, their love could not be faked. After scaring away the mountain god of Lascivious Temple and the white deer Taoist, Chen Pingan picked up the armor pill and put it into the Zongzuan item. Then he quietly rushed to the corridor of the third and fourth courtyard, ready to use the two flying swords to kill the enemy. 15 was responsible for killing the swordsman, and Chuyi was responsible for delaying and exhausting the female ghost. However, when Chen Pingan was about to let the two flying swords fly out of the blade-strengthening gourd, he found that the battle had stopped and the two sides did not intend to fight desperately. Chen Pingan listened to the man's heartfelt words and was not sure if he was telling the truth. So he began to hold his breath and stood silently behind a pillar that covered his body. When the bearded swordsman asked the Daoist Zhongshan to leave, Chen Pingan pondered for a moment. Then, with a tap of his foot, his body shot up into the air. He then stepped on the pillars of the corridor and shot out towards the third courtyard. His body flashed and disappeared from the top of the corridor. His hands lightly patted the beam in front of him. His body was like a fish swimming in water, smoothly passing through it. Very quickly, he returned to the second courtyard from the third courtyard. He floated down and stood in front of the door of his original residence. The moment Chen Pingan sat down, the young Daoist rushed over. "Chen Pingan," the Taoist Zhongshan said anxiously, "let's take the things and leave quickly. Master Shu wants us to go to the town quickly. Things are complicated. I can't explain it clearly in a short time." Chen Pingan stood up and suddenly pointed to the door of the old house. Someone broke in. After a group of people entered the door, they put away their oil paper umbrellas and went around the screen wall. They turned into the corridor and strode toward the courtyard. This group of people all wore elegant and exquisite Taoist robes. On their heads, one of the three Taoists was a fishtail crown. There were 5 Taoists, old and young, male and female. They had an extraordinary aura. The old Taoist in the lead should be the leader. In the night, his eyes were still bright and radiant. At first glance, one could tell that he was a successful immortal. As for the other 4 people, there was a young Taoist in his 20s. He held a bronze bell in his hand and carried a long sword in a black scabbard. The sword tassel was a long string of golden silk knots. It was very eye-catching. There was a young boy and a young girl who looked very similar. They looked arrogant. One of them had a long black rope coiled around his waist. The other had a beautiful green and yellow bamboo whip. There was also a smiling toddler. Because he was the smallest and had the shortest legs, he seemed to walk with a swagger. In his hand was an inconspicuous long piece of wood, but it was engraved with the ancient words 10,000 Ghosts Bow. The young Taoist chuckled and said, "Master, he is a human, not a demon." The old Daoist nodded and ignored Chen Pingan and Zhongshan who were standing at the door of the room. He walked straight ahead. When the men and women brushed past them, they were not interested in Chen Pingan who carried the wooden box and 2 swords on his back. They only looked at Zhongshan's Daoist hat and Daoist robes, as if they found them somewhat novel. The 5 Taoists left the 2 behind. After the old Taoist stepped into the courtyard, he suddenly shouted angrily, "Bastard Yang Huang, come out and admit your guilt." When the man holding a sword under the embroidery building heard the familiar voice, he was both happy and worried. He was glad that the old Taoist was undoubtedly an inner core disciple of the Divine Grandeur sect, which meant that his letter asking for help had worked. Although the sect had already removed his Taoist credentials, they still didn't intend to ignore it. Instead, they really sent someone down the mountain to investigate this matter. This meant that Qin Haodong, the mountain god of the Divine Grandeur sect, was doomed to face serious consequences. However, the man was also more worried. The old Taoist was of the same generation as him. They were both God's favored disciples who entered the Divine Grandeur sect in the same year. Their masters were also the same. However, the relationship between the 2 was extremely bad. When they were cultivating in the Divine Grandeur sect, they were like fire and water. Now, one was an unattainable immortal master and the other was a lowly ghost who was neither human nor ghost. What could he do if the old Taoist took revenge? Behind the old Taoist, not behind Yang Huang, was the Divine Grandeur sect, which had a Taoist master of a continent. The man holding a sword asked the woman to hide behind him. He gently stabbed the long sword into the ground and no longer held it. He faced the corridor and bowed deeply. "I, Yang Huang, am willing to accept the sect's punishment." The old Taoist stepped into the square of the embroidery building in high spirits and twitched the corner of his mouth. "Yang Huang, I haven't seen you for 100 years. You've been doing well." The bearded swordsman turned his head and looked. After seeing the attire of the 5 Taoists, he did not go up to the immortal masters of the Divine Grandeur sect. Instead, He cupped his hands and bowed to the man who bowed. "Tonight, I offended you and your wife. I sincerely apologize. If there's a need, I'll definitely step forward bravely." The bearded swordsman had been in Jianghu for 20 years. His eyes were sharp and experienced. He saw through the conflict between Yang Huang and the old Taoist of the Divine Grandeur sect. Fortune and misfortune came hand in hand. Those old and young Taoists were just short of pasting the words "decent people" on their foreheads. The Taoist priest Zhongshan sighed and said, as expected of a Taoist priest from the Aquarius continent. Looking at his own attire, the young Taoist priest from the Julu continent felt a little ashamed. However, he was still worried about the bearded swordsman. He pulled Chen Pinggan along and followed them from afar. The old Taoist of the Divine Grandeur sect had already brought 4 juniors who had gone down the mountain to gain experience. They walked into the dilapidated square. He quietly made a gesture unique to the sect with his hands behind his back. The other 4 immediately flew out and took their positions, surrounding the man and woman of the old house. The man with the sword was still standing on the high wall. Looking at this posture, it did not seem like the extravagance of the arrival of a backer. The man named Yang Huang reached out and held the ugly female ghost's hand. He said softly, "I'm willing to be husband and wife for generations to come." The female ghost still could not speak. She whimpered, but everyone present knew that she was saying, "I'm willing to be husband and wife for generations to come." Just like that. The straw sandals youth, who had planned to watch coldly from the sidelines, burst into tears. Even he was a little dazed. His childhood memories had long been blurred. He could not remember many things clearly. However, there was a scene that Chen Pinggan still remembered clearly. His father was a wooden person who was not good with words. He might have only said one word of love in his life. "Can we still be together in the next life?" The demure woman who was mending clothes smiled and asked, "How can we not be together?" At that time, Chen Pinggan was nestled in the woman's arms. He was too young to feel these words that involved life and death. However, the appearance and expression of his parents at that moment was etched in the child's mind. As time passed, after his parents left, Chen Pinggan felt that if he really liked someone, it seemed that a lifetime was not enough. Hence, such a scene occurred. Taoist Zhongshan inadvertently noticed Chen Pinggan's strange behavior. He wiped his cheeks and was a little confused. No matter how heavy the rain was, his face shouldn't be full of rain, right? What's more, this torrential rain had turned into a drizzle now. It would be fine even if he did not hold an umbrella. Zhongshan was a little worried and asked, "Chen Pinggan, are you okay?" Chen Pinggan hurriedly wiped his face and squeezed out a smile. He shook his head and said, "I'm fine. There are so many strange things tonight. It's too scary. I'm a slow person. I didn't care about the fright before. Now that I'm fine, I dare to cry freely." Taoist Zhongshan's face was full of admiration. He reached out and patted Chen Pinggan's shoulder. He turned his head and held back his laughter. "Just pretend that I didn't see it." The old Taoist of the Shunghua sect looked around and finally smiled at the man standing upright in the old house. He clicked his tongue and said, "Things remain the same, but people change. What a pair of unfortunate lovers. Yang Huang, how do you think I'll deal with you? Do you think I'll deal with you according to the golden rules of the sect? Or do I act according to the personal relationship between you and me and not according to the rules?" The man clenched his teeth and remained silent. But in the end, he had to kneel down and beg for mercy. He only hoped that this immortal master of the Shunghua sect would be lenient. The big-bearded swordsman was about to speak. He had to speak up for justice. The old Taoist turned his head. His eyes were gloomy and he shouted, "Outsiders, shut up. The Shunghua sect is cleaning up its own sect. It's not up to others to tell us what to do." The big-bearded swordsman was so angry that his eyes were bloodshot. He wanted to raise his sword and cut down. But in the end, he could only sigh dejectedly. This was a family affair of a big sect. If outsiders dared to meddle in it, they would die in vain. Jianghu was like this, and so was the mountain. It was the same no matter where one went. Everywhere one went, one would feel suffocated. At this moment, Chen Pinggan turned his head and quietly handed a round ball to Taoist Zhongshan. Zhongshan, from now on, we don't know each other. You can keep this thing. Taoist Zhongshan pushed it back and whispered, Chen Pinggan, don't mess around. If you make the first move, you won't be in the right. I know how to deal with these immortal masters. It'll definitely work. Remember, when I get beaten up later, don't help. Otherwise, all our previous efforts will be wasted. Chen Pinggan asked, is that okay? The young Taoist smiled brightly and said, try it. If it doesn't work, you can help. After saying this, Taoist Zhongshan was a little happy. Chen Pinggan was at most a martial artist of the third realm. He would only be beaten up if he went. Luckily, the ancestors of the three sects were here to protect their disciples. Zhongshan Feng must succeed this time. 219. The young Daoist stood up, tidied his clothes, and strode into the square of the embroidery building. He looked like he was going to sacrifice himself for a cause. He said loudly, everyone, please listen to what I have to say. Everyone present looked at this foreign Daoist with different expressions. The young Daoist from the Divine Grandeur sect had a black rope tied around his waist. When the young Daoist saw Zhongshan, he looked unhappy. He took off the rope and threw it out. The rope was like a spiritual snake. It stretched itself in the air and tied up the young Daoist in an instant. Zhongshan was like a dumpling, he swayed and almost fell. It took him a lot of effort to stabilize himself. The young Daoist from the Divine Grandeur sect sneered, why should we listen to your nonsense? You're just a fake Daoist from an unknown background. If you dare to make noise again, I'll throw you out of the courtyard. Daoist Zhongshan said angrily, my name is Zhongshan, and I'm from the Jialu continent. My master is the fire dragon immortal from the soaring cloud sect. I'm also the descendant of the Zhong family from the Dragon Tiger Mountain. I've traveled far and wide to the Aquarius continent to train my Daoist heart in order to complete the test of the Dragon Tiger Mountain. As long as I return to my hometown, I'll be able to become a registered Daoist in the Celestial Master Mansion's Golden Jade Register. Your Divine Grandeur sect is so arrogant. How dare you humiliate the Zhong family from the Dragon Tiger Mountain? The young Daoist from the Divine Grandeur sect, who lacked experience in the Jianghu, was a little confused. Obviously, he was intimidated by the Celestial Master Mansion of the Dragon Tiger Mountain. He really didn't have the confidence to wrestle with the Divine Grandeur sect. A person's reputation was like a tree's shadow. Any sect whose reputation could spread to the Aquarius continent was not to be trifled with. The Dragon Tiger Mountain of the Central Divine Continent was even more famous. It didn't belong to any of the three Daoist sects and was an independent Daoist orthodoxy. The young Daoist from the Divine Grandeur sect had heard of it long ago, but it was only limited to some supernatural legends. Most of them were false rumors spread by the unknowledgeable commoners. The Qi cultivators on the mountain didn't take it seriously and only treated it as a joke. However, the Divine Grandeur sect was an immortal family that started with the word sect. They knew the real power of the Celestial Master Mansion of the Dragon Tiger Mountain much better than others. The Celestial Master Zhong of the Zhong family had a palm print in one hand and an immortal sword in the other. His Daoist techniques were boundless, and his killing power was boundless. He was an immortal in the upper 5 realms who could rank among the top 10 in the Central Divine Continent, which was similar to the Divine Grandeur sect master and the Heavenly Lord Qi Zhen's transcendent status in the Eastern Aquarius continent. Therefore, the Divine Grandeur sect could easily understand the immortal aura of the Dragon Tiger Mountain. The Daoist Zhongshan pressed on, looking righteous as he stared at the leading old Daoist whose eyes were flickering. Yang Huang, as a former disciple of the Divine Grandeur sect, has fallen to such a state because of love. Even I, an outsider, feel that it's tragic and should shed a tear of sympathy for the couple. As the leading orthodoxy in the Aquarius continent, the Divine Grandeur sect should have the same bearing, right? The youngest Daoist of the Divine Grandeur sect, who held an ancient wooden stick, gently tugged at the young Daoist's sleeve and whispered, "Senior sister, I think that Celestial Master Zhong is right." "Alas, what do you think?" The young girl with a yellow bamboo whip at her waist shook her head and said, "It's just empty pleasantries. Don't take it seriously." Chen Ping'an's eyes were opened. However, at the same time, he glanced at the edge of the embroidered tower from the corner of his eyes and felt a little confused. The Daoist Zhongshan wanted to point his finger at the old Daoist's nose to boost his momentum. However, he realized that he was tightly tied up. Instead, he hopped forward and sneered, "Elder Immortal, you're Yang Huang's senior brother of the same generation. We've cultivated in the same sect for many years. Today, we're meeting an old friend in a foreign land. Why are we meeting with weapons instead of holding hands? Why? Our Zhong clan's celestial masters, no matter if they're on the register or on the record, as long as they travel the world and meet each other, they'll feel like old friends at first sight. Why is it that your Divine Grandeur sect doesn't have such an atmosphere? Besides, although I'm a disciple of the Zhong clan of Dragon Tiger Mountain, I'm also a mountaineer and a cultivator. I know the simple truth that the law is nothing more than human feelings." The young Daoist changed his tone and said with a smile, "Elder Immortal, could it be that you have an old grudge with Yang Huang, so you don't care about your sect's magnanimity and force this couple to their deaths? However, I don't think that's possible. Elder Immortal looks like an open-minded person. After this, I, Zhongshan, will definitely spread the name of Elder Immortal and the Divine Grandeur sect. Even if we go to the ancestral court's Dragon Tiger Mountain in the future, as long as the Divine Grandeur sect is mentioned, they'll give us a thumbs up." The old Daoist with his hands behind his back narrowed his eyes and smiled without saying a word. The young Daoist standing on the wall suddenly spoke in a language that no one could understand. Daoist Zhongshan was confused. Unexpectedly, the young Daoist with the sword and the bell turned back to the Aquarius continent and looked down at him. He pointed at Daoist Zhongshan and said angrily, "You liar. This poor Daoist is asking you in the official language of Julu continent, why can't you answer a single question? In the Aquarius continent, you dare to pretend to be a disciple of the Zhong clan of Dragon Tiger Mountain. You're going against the orthodoxy of the continent. Do you know that the Divine Grandeur sect has the right to take you down? Kneel down and admit your mistake." Zhongshan didn't expect to meet a bastard who was even better at bragging than him. He was furious and began to scold the young Daoist in the official language of the Julu continent. Then, he turned back to the Aquarius continent's language and said, "What nonsense! What a Divine Grandeur sect! What a Daoist master of the Aquarius continent!" Unexpectedly, the young Daoist on the wall ignored Zhongshan and turned to look at the old Daoist. He suggested with a smile, "Master, we've already determined that this person isn't from the Julu continent. As for whether he's a disciple of the Zhong clan of Dragon Tiger Mountain, we still need to confirm it slowly. Why don't we take him down first and throw him aside? We'll clean up the sect first and deal with the Gui Gui and the tree spirit before we talk about anything else." The old Daoist seemed to be moved. Just as he was about to speak, the bearded swordsman, Shu Yuanxia, finally couldn't hold back the resentment in his chest. As he said earlier, he stepped forward with his treasured saber in hand and laughed, "I'm just a nobody. I can't ask the immortal masters of the Divine Grandeur sect to give me any face. However, if the immortal masters want to punish Yang Huang and do things according to the law, I'm all ears. I'll see if the immortal masters of the Divine Grandeur sect can be followed. However, if you don't give me an explanation and want to kill Yang Huang and his wife, I'm willing to give up 100 kilograms of meat and just use the saber in my hand to experience the immortal master's heavenly Tao." The young Divine Grandeur sect who used the demon binding rope suddenly asked, "Since you claim to be from a small sect of Dragon Tiger Mountain located in the Julu continent, do you have a customs clearance document? Can you prove that you're from the Julu continent and are a disciple of the Zhong clan? If you can't prove it, you'll have to bear the consequences of impersonating Celestial Master Zhong of Dragon Tiger Mountain." Daoist Zhongshan's expression was troubled and showed a hint of hesitation. The bearded swordsman had a headache. If this young Daoist was really impulsive and pretended to be a distant relative of the yellow-purple noble of Dragon Tiger Mountain, the crime was not small. If he fell into the hands of the Divine Grandeur sect, which had the power to supervise the orthodoxy of a continent, he would suffer greatly. The responsibility of a continent's Daoist master could be summed up in 4 words. However, it carried a lot of weight. It was called clean from the beginning. Daoist Zhongshan took a deep breath and turned to say, "Chen Pingan, help me take out the customs clearance document from the bag." The servant of the old house, Yang Huang, smiled bitterly and turned to look at her. She seemed to have seen through her husband's thoughts and nodded. Only then did Yang Huang turn back and say loudly, "Swordsman Shu, Daoist Zhong, I appreciate your kindness. If there's an afterlife, I'll definitely repay you. Today, whether the Divine Grandeur sect will punish me according to public law or take revenge for my personal grudge, I'll take full responsibility with my wife. However, Swordsman Shu, Daoist Zhong, and that little brother surnamed Chen, don't think that all cultivators of the Divine Grandeur sect are like this person. Absolutely not." At the end of his words, Yang Huang laughed wantonly as if he had lived for 100 years. He had never felt so relaxed and happy. He pointed at himself with his thumb and said, "My Divine Grandeur sect." After a short pause, Yang Huang pointed at the old Daoist and said, "Idiots like you who don't cultivate the mind are the minority. No wonder 100 years have passed and you, Zhao Liu, are still at the 5th realm. Haha, 100 years ago, I was already a 5th realm qi cultivator. If I remember correctly, you, Zhao Liu, were only at the 3rd realm Willow Tendon realm? What a good retention realm. The ones who are retained the most are bastards with evil intentions like you." The man of the old house said these words without restraint and to his heart's content. However, the juniors of the sect under the old Daoist's command looked at each other in dismay. They were quite embarrassed. Especially the young Daoist who called the old Daoist master. His murderous intent was revealed, and the long sword on his back was restless in the sheath. He was actually a sword cultivator. However, Yang Huang's words happened to poke at this person's heart. His master, Zhao Liu, had been stuck at the 3rd realm for dozens of years. The young sword cultivator had also been stuck at this realm for a long time. Step by step, he went from being a brilliant sword cultivator to being a fine jade with a hope of reaching the 5th realm. Slowly, he became an embroidered pillow with a bleak future. He was almost hopeless in refining a natal flying sword. His status in the Divine Grandeur sect had also plummeted within a short 10 years. Thinking back to those years, he was even able to chat with the famous Golden Boy and Jade Girl occasionally. What kind of honor was that? Especially the nun who was often accompanied by a mystical white deer. When they were chatting, she even revealed a trace of a smile. What kind of rare and beautiful scene was that? Even if it was a polite smile, so what? After all, she was a woman that even a sword immortal on the land couldn't get. Moreover, the sword immortal of the Wind Snow Temple was the youngest sword cultivator in the upper 5 realms in the history of the Aquarius continent. In the end, he could only follow a master who had no hope of reaching the Great Tao. He led this group of brats to the muddy pond at the foot of the mountain. They climbed and rolled in the mud in the name of training their minds. Along the way, they killed some otherworldly items that didn't have spiritual intelligence and subdued some mountain spirits and water monsters that hadn't transformed into human forms. Then, they entangled with all kinds of evil disciples of the sect, tree demons, and female ghosts. What was this? In anger, he was about to draw his sword. Anyway, the one he killed was a ghost tree spirit, so it wasn't a pity that it died. No matter how bad he was still a 3rd realm sword cultivator who was in charge of the external affairs of the Divine Grandeur sect along with several elders. After all, he had some friendship with the Golden Boy in charge of the Divine Grandeur sect's external affairs. Even if he was punished, it would be something like meditating on the wall and copying books. What was there to be afraid of? A mischievous voice sounded without warning. You can't draw your sword out of its sheath casually. Everyone followed the voice and looked up at the same time. There were ripples in the night sky. The uninvited guest seemed to have used a superior invisible talisman. In fact, she had been watching the fire on the other side of the roof. At this moment, she slowly showed herself. It was a girl who was not so slim and graceful. She was not fat either. She had a rosy round face and was wearing red satin clothes. She looked very lucky. The old Taoist was a little panicked. He hurriedly cupped his hands and bowed. Zhao Liu greets Marshal Aunt Fu. The round-faced girl who was standing on a long sword asked in confusion, "You know me?" The old Taoist was full of smiles. Every disciple of the Divine Grandeur sect, no matter in the inner or outer sect, knows Marshal Aunt Fu. That's too ignorant. The round-faced girl's face suddenly darkened. She sneered and said, "What? The whole sect already knows that I failed to confess my love to the golden boy? Which gossipy woman or idler told you? Tell me. When I return to the sect, I must thank them properly." The old Daoist was not the only one who was confused. In fact, everyone else was at a loss. The reason why they recognized this martial Grandmaster Fu was not because of the confession, but because she was a very senior female sword cultivator. She had a powerful backer in the Divine Grandeur sect, and she liked to ride her sword at high speed, dashing between the mountains. Moreover, she was a little fat girl. She flew here and there all year round, and one of her favorite things to do was to ride her sword straight into the clouds. Then, she would crash down from 1,000 feet to 1,000 feet high, and when she was about 20 to 30 feet above the ground, she would immediately pull up her sword and fly close to the ground, dashing into the distance. Which ordinary sword cultivator would dare to do this? Who wouldn't remember this little ancestor? Moreover, 2 years ago, the young girl had attempted to change her direction when she was 10 feet above the ground. In the end, she had crashed headfirst into the ground. She and her sword had simply fallen upside down, standing there all alone. The spectating disciples who had originally clapped their hands and cheered were all speechless. In the end, it was He Xiaoyong, the jade girl who was very close to her, who scolded her and made her behave herself. Not long after that, the girl broke through the bottleneck of the fifth realm and successfully entered the cave realm. Then, she began to ride her sword in the Divine Grandeur sect. Every day, she would wander in front of the cave residences of the old immortals on the mountains. The elders of the sect who were used to peaceful cultivation were all annoyed by her. However, the girl's great-grandfather was the teacher of Qi Zhen, the current leader of the Divine Grandeur sect. Therefore, the Divine Lord Qi Zhen, who had always been cold, only treated this descendant of his teacher more favorably than the golden boy and the jade girl. When the girl saw the expressions of the crowd, she immediately knew that she had misunderstood and let slip. She wished she could ride her sword thousands of miles away. However, when she thought of Sister He and the *T golden boy's instructions, she had to suppress her anger and shame. She stood on the roof ridge with a straight face and began to think of the wording to send away the insignificant man and woman in the old mansion. Like many other sects, the Divine Grandeur sect was divided into inner and outer sects. Before He Xiaoyong left the Divine Grandeur sect, it was an extremely rare event for the golden boy and the jade girl to come out of the same sect. In order to train the two gods' favored children, Qi Zhen specially allowed the two juniors to intervene in the affairs of the outer sect. Of course, he didn't directly throw them into such a big mess and let them have the power to make decisions. Instead, he gave them the power to supervise hundreds of officials, similar to the imperial censors of the secular dynasties. Sometimes, He Xiaoyong and the jade girl would be given full authority to deal with some of the affairs of the outer sect. They would have the power to write down specific suggestions on how to deal with the affairs of the outer sect and then hand it to the disciples of the sect who were in charge of the affairs of the outer sect. Therefore, He Xiaoyong, the jade girl of the orthodoxy of the Aquarius continent, was indeed deeply cultivated by the sect. However, she resolutely chose to leave the Divine Grandeur sect. Not to mention outsiders, even the elders and ancestors of the Divine Grandeur sect found it unbelievable. That was why they angrily scolded He Xiaoyong for being an ungrateful wretch. Indeed, the entire Divine Grandeur sect valued He Xiaoyong too much. As the saying goes, love deeply and hate deeply. The Divine Grandeur sect had already received the secret letter Yang Huang sent to the mountain gate at the beginning of the new year. At that time, He Xiaoyong hadn't left the sect yet and had a conflict with Jin Tong over this letter. Jin Tong first raised his brush and wrote down the letter. The content was generally about how to deal with it appropriately and not to be too harsh on Yang Huang. However, He Xiaoyong directly gave the opposite opinion. The wording of the letter was extremely harsh. It said that Yang Huang, as a disciple of the Divine Grandeur sect, should be severely punished as a warning to others. However, He Xiaoliang and Jin Tong's punishment of the female ghost was similar. They chose to ignore it. Because of the conflict between the two sides, Yang Huang's secret letter was temporarily shelved. Regarding this matter, the outer gate of the Divine Grandeur sect was more inclined to support He Xiaoliang. However, no one expected that He Xiaoliang suddenly stopped being a disciple of the Divine Grandeur sect and even abandoned her identity as the Jade Girl of the continent. Jin Tong, who had admired He Xiaoliang for many years, seemed to think that the secret letter was too unlucky and didn't want to pay any attention to it. Moreover, he had countless things to deal with at hand. He casually threw the letter to an outer gate law enforcement elder and said that it was for a disciple to go down the mountain to gain experience. He just needed to do it and didn't need to consider the contradictory content of the letter. The subsequent events were very clear. Zhao Liu grabbed this opportunity and personally went down the mountain to take revenge. However, the round-faced girl surnamed Fu secretly followed them all the way after hearing about this matter from somewhere. It was a good opportunity for her to relax and not think about that dogshit Jin Tong all the time. She flew over thousands of mountains and rivers on her sword and was very happy. Along the way, there were occasional disturbances. When they heard that she was a disciple of the Divine Grandeur sect's inner gate, each and every one of the unruly martial masters and cultivators wanted to worship her like a bodhisattva. The words of the girl surnamed Fu could be faked. However, the rare lotus crown that no one dared to overstep and the eye-catching golden jade pendant on her waist couldn't be faked. After the round-faced girl appeared, the big-bearded swordsman and Daoist priest Zhongshan both understood that the fate of Yang Huang and his wife was no longer within their control. It was meaningless to say anything more. A single sentence from an elder of the Divine Grandeur sect was enough. Yang Huang held the female ghost's hand and raised his head to look at the girl. He smiled calmly and said, "Evil creature Yang Huang and my wife are at Martial Aunt Fu's disposal. Regardless of life or death, we will follow Martial Aunt's orders." The round-faced girl glanced at the couple. One was haggard and the other was ugly. Their appearances were really unlikable. Of course, she didn't hate them either. When she thought of the two red comments in the secret letter, the girl sighed. Since Sister He was no longer a member of the Divine Grandeur sect, then she should just follow that dogshit Jin Tong's wishes. She cleared her throat and ordered, "Zhao Liu, lead the team and deal with that obscene temple. As for whether you want to do it personally or contact the local government, it's up to you. Yang Huang and his wife, that's all. In the future, as long as you don't use the name of the Divine Grandeur sect to do bad things, from today onwards, everything you do will have nothing to do with the Divine Grandeur sect." Since she was done watching the show, the round-faced girl didn't want to stay in this desolate place any longer. She quickly rode on her sword and left at an extremely fast speed. When others rode on their swords, they would slowly climb up a slope in an arc before finally entering the sky. However, the girl with the surname Fu wished she could fly in a straight line and soar into the sky. It was a hair-raising sight and felt that she would fall back to the ground if she wasn't careful. Yang Huang remembered something and said loudly, "Thank you for repelling the enemy, Martial Aunt Fu." The old Daoist, Zhao Liu, cupped his hands and respectfully sent the girl off. After that, he snorted and left without saying a word. Yang Huang didn't get carried away. Instead, he cupped his hands and apologized to the other immortals of the Divine Grandeur sect. "Yang Huang's body is filthy. I don't dare to send you off." The young Daoist who retrieved the demon binding rope and the sister with the ghost-striking bamboo whip on her waist hesitated for a moment before nodding their heads. The little Daoist who held the demon subduing wood swaggered away. Suddenly, he turned his head and made a funny face. He smiled at the female ghost and said, "Ugly freak, ugly freak." The female ghost who was originally smiling suddenly had a distressed expression. She slowly turned her head and covered her face with her hands, not daring to look at anyone else. In an instant, the little Daoist suddenly stopped in his tracks and stood there in a daze, not moving an inch. It wasn't that he didn't want to move, but that he didn't dare to. Among the group of people, The disciple who was truly valued the most by the sect was him, who was born with outstanding intuition, and not the twin siblings. He was not even the idiotic sword cultivator who had been basking in the sun for many years on the third realm. He quickly turned his head and looked over. The little Daoist gripped the demon-subduing wood that was inscribed with the words 10,000 Ghosts Bow. His palms were sweaty as he slowly shifted his gaze. Ignoring the ugly female ghost, there was the sickly ghost Yang Huang, the bearded swordsman who only relied on a divine weapon to flaunt his might. It was very likely that it was Mount Longhu's celestial master Zhong's Ju Luzhu Daoist. Finally, it was that expressionless youth with a case on his back. In the eyes of others, the actions of the young and tender Daoist would only be seen as the playfulness of a child. Only Chen Pinggan extended 2 fingers and quietly made a strange gesture of poking forward. The little Daoist quickly blinked and swallowed his saliva. In the end, he forced a smile and politely waved goodbye to the fellow whose intuition made him feel extremely dangerous. The little Daoist complained as he ran. "Oh my God, why did this fellow's fierce aura seem so much like an old monster from the middle 5 realms? Moreover, he was the kind of cultivator who often went down the mountain to fight and had experienced hundreds of battles." The little Daoist didn't want to go overboard and instigate Zhao Liu and his disciple to come back and attack because it was meaningless. On the path of cultivation, other than seeking the Tao, it was better to avoid unnecessary trouble. This wasn't nonsense. As the little Daoist ran, a smile appeared on his face again. His mood suddenly changed from gloomy to amorous. Wow, it was exactly like what his master said. There was also an otherworldly expert at the foot of the mountain. Didn't he just run into one? When he returned, he definitely had to tell his master that the person he met was at least an old monster at the Aurus Core realm. He might even be a 10th realm Earth immortal. He was so damn shameless and pretended to be a young man. He was so scared that he almost pissed his pants. The little Daoist ran cheerfully and even jumped up and down. He said happily, "Oh my. This trip down the mountain wasn't a loss." The brother and sister in front of the handwriting veranda turned their heads at the same time with tacit understanding. The little Daoist immediately held his breath and concentrated. After he landed, he continued to move forward steadily like an old man. On the other side of the embroidery tower, although the man and woman of the old residence were frightened from beginning to end, they had finally survived a disaster. The husband and wife shook hands and smiled at each other. Everything was understood without words. They only felt that they had fulfilled their wishes. The burden had been lifted and the bitterness was over. The Daoist priest Zhongshan smiled at Chen Pinggan and said, "Sword immortal, sword immortal. Did you see that? Such a young sword immortal. He's amazing, right?" Chen Pinggan was somewhat helpless. The rain had stopped. The young Daoist priest looked at the night sky and sighed, "I really want to recite a poem." The big-bearded swordsman laughed heartily and happily. No matter what, the matter finally had a happy ending. This made the big-bearded swordsman feel even more joyful than when he was enforcing justice on behalf of the heavens, successfully slaying demons, and drinking good wine. The old woman who couldn't get up from the ground finally woke up in the courtyard. She immediately flew over. In the end, she was slightly relieved when she saw her master and mistress living together in peace. Yang Huang smiled softly at the old woman and said, "It's all in the past. You don't have to worry about those sneaky people anymore." The old woman was stunned at first. Then, she burst into tears of joy and choked with sobs. The female ghost named Yingying slowly moved her body and wandered over. She gently held the old woman's shoulder and comforted her gently, "It's okay, it's okay." She was relieved and no longer looked haggard and dispirited. The ghost Yang Huang laughed and said, "Hero Shu, Immortal Master Zhong, and Mr. Chen, if you don't mind, let us be the hosts. Prepare a table of good wine and dishes. Drink to our heart's content." The big-bearded swordsman Shu Yuanxia smiled and nodded. He asked the Daoist priest Zhongshan and Chen Pinggan, "What do you think?" The Daoist priest Zhongshan smiled and said, "Why not?" Chen Pinggan also smiled and nodded. He patted the wine gourd at his waist and said, "If it's possible, I'd like to buy some wine from you." Yang Huang waved his hand, as if he had recovered the high-spirited spirit of the Divine Grandeur sect's disciple. He said straightforwardly, "What wine? It's our home-brewed cellar wine. It's not really good wine, but it tastes really good. After supper, we'll eat and drink to our heart's content. Mr. Chen, you can take it away." Everyone laughed loudly. The old house no longer had any eerie yin-qi. There was only the Jianghu heroic spirit that intoxicated people before drinking. After that, the old woman was beaming with joy. She kept lowering her head and wiping her tears. She quickly walked to the kitchen to cook. The couple received guests in the main room of the courtyard and chatted with the big-bearded swordsman about Jianghu matters. The Daoist priest Zhongshan hesitated for a moment, but still called Chen Pinggan. They came to the courtyard's veranda and said apologetically, "Chen Pinggan, my real name is Zhongshanfeng, not Zhongshan. I'm sorry. As a friend, I hid it from you for so long. It's not very kind of me." Chen Pinggan sat on the railing and said softly, "In Jianghu, it's better to be safe than sorry. There's nothing wrong with that." The young Daoist priest's eyes lit up. He laughed and said softly, "You're not using your real name in Jianghu? Am I right? Like I said, although the name Chen Pinggan has a good meaning, it's still a bit tacky." Chen Pinggan rolled his eyes and said, "It's my real name." The young Daoist priest was a bit embarrassed. After a moment of silence, he remembered something and asked softly, "Why did you give me a round ball earlier?" Chen Pinggan said sorry in his heart. He then smiled and said, "Actually, there was a big fight in the opposite room. I went out to watch a fierce battle. The scholar surnamed Chu was a tree demon. After he was killed by a sword immortal, he left behind a magic weapon called armor pill. The sword immortal didn't like it and left directly. I went to pick it up secretly." Chen Pinggan reached out and handed over the round ball. The sword immortal should be the young girl from the Divine Grandeur sect. The young Daoist priest was enlightened. He took it and weighed it in his hand. It was not heavy. He lowered his head and looked at it carefully. He turned it gently in his palm and saw a small crack. The Daoist priest from the Ju Luzhu called Zhongshanfeng had a serious expression. He returned it to Chen Pinggan and said, "It's indeed very similar to the legendary armor pill of the military school. However, this armor pill should have been severely damaged, causing a flaw to appear on it. Even so, the armor pill is an extremely rare and expensive treasure. Although I don't know how expensive it is, it's definitely worth a city. Keep it well and don't let anyone see it. As long as you find an expert to repair it, you can wear it without worry. It's equivalent to a first-class amulet." According to the scholar with the surname Chu, this armor pill of the military school was an earth-ranked magic treasure from the royal treasury of the Jiyu kingdom. It was worth 3,000 snowflakes. Chen Pinggan did not hide it in his sleeves and took the opportunity to put it away. Instead, he said tentatively, "You also know that I am a martial artist, and the boxing that I learn is particular about moving forward. I can't rely too much on external objects. Otherwise, it will make my boxing style not smooth enough. Therefore, I don't have much use for this armor pill. I'll sell it to you for 300 snowflakes. How about that?" The young Daoist priest shook his head vigorously and said self-mockingly, "Let's not talk about 300 snowflakes. Even if it was 1,000 or 2,000 snowflakes, such a treasure that can only be found by chance. As long as I have the wealth, I will buy it even if I have to sell everything I have. I won't even blink an eye. However, I am now so poor that I can't even afford a full meal on the Kuan boat." Chen Pinggan gently tossed the round ball to the Daoist priest Zhongshanfeng. He smiled and said, "Then take it that you owe me 300 snowflakes. Don't be in a hurry to reject it. Think about it. With your body that faints when you get drenched in the rain, if we meet any demons or ghosts in the future, how are we going to fight them? If you wear the armor pill, perhaps our chances of winning will be much higher. Once we gain something, it will all belong to me. Take it as you paying me back. Is that okay?" The young Daoist priest sighed and carefully accepted the armor pill that he did not even dare to dream of. He sat side by side with Chen Pinggan on the railing of the veranda. They looked at the sky together and softly called out, "Chen Pinggan." Then, he did not say anything else. It was as if there were many things that he could not say. Chen Pinggan put his hands on the railing and said, "You see, from the beginning to the end, I did not help much this time. You also did not dislike me for being a hindrance." The young Daoist scratched his head. When he said that, he seemed to be a little more relaxed. Chen Pinggan treated him as a friend, and he also treated him as a friend. Between friends, there was no need to be so formal and particular about everything. He suddenly laughed and said, brushing his beard like a halberd, "A hero with a treasured sword." Chen Pinggan smiled. Well, he was praising the bearded man Shu Yuanxia. The young Daoist said again, abandoning literature to travel the sea and mountains, hard to find Xuanzhen. Well, he should be talking about himself. The Daoist priest Zhong Shanfeng turned his head and said, "Chen Pinggan, I did not think of a poem about you. When I feel inspired in the future, I will definitely have one. Don't worry, I promise that it will be very heroic." Chen Pinggan did not know whether to laugh or cry. He did not want to dampen his mood, so he nodded and said, "Okay, okay." Chen Pinggan jumped down from the railing and ran to the kitchen. He turned his head and shouted, "I'll go help cook." The Daoist priest Zhong Shanfeng nodded and sat in the same place with mixed feelings. From the main room, the bearded man's hearty laughter could be heard from time to time. The young Daoist priest changed his sitting position and leaned against the pillar. He crossed his arms and thought of the mountain in his hometown. He closed his eyes and hummed a self-made song. He shook his head and leisurely. Finally, the young Daoist opened his eyes and murmured, "Who wrote this song?" Zhong Shanfeng of Wudang Mountain. Chen Pinggan was actually thinking about something. In the previous battle with the scholar surnamed Chu, Chen Pinggan had a rough idea of his strength in the three realms of martial arts. Among the many fist techniques that the barefoot old man had imparted to him, the deity drum beating style was the most powerful one. Chen Pinggan had used the length withdrawal talisman to hit him with one punch and then followed up with another punch. Even so, although the scholar from the ancient Yu kingdom had the armor of light transformed from the armor pill to protect him, the limit of Chen Pinggan's fist technique was actually the 20 punches of the deity drum beating style. He could not even use one more punch. Therefore, if the flying sword in the sword-nurturing gourd had not killed the enemy, he was afraid that the scholar would have exhausted his strength. Once the deity drum beating style was used up, he would be able to free up his hands. If he had used one or two offensive magic treasures, what would Chen Pinggan do? It would not be difficult to escape, but it would be difficult to win and kill the enemy. However, to be able to combine his fist technique with the attack of Chu Yi and Chu Wu's flying swords, and even a little bit seamlessly, was also a gain. However, deep in Chen Pinggan's heart, he still felt that it was not satisfying enough. It was still lacking a little meaning. It seemed that the real answer was very simple. Chen Pinggan's fist was still not fast enough, not fierce enough. Chen Pinggan collected his thoughts. Whether it was to practice his fist technique or sword technique in the future, he could not rush it. He just had to take one step at a time and move forward steadily. He patted the sword-nurturing gourd at his waist and laughed softly, "Thanks for this time." The gourd sensed something and Chu Wu began to fly around excitedly. Chen Pinggan suddenly said, "But when the two of you appear in the future, can you not be so dazzling? The three of us are not sparring with others in martial arts. Before we fight, we need to announce our names and show our weapons. Let's not pay attention to these when we fight the enemy, right? Sneaking out of the sword-nurturing gourd is fine. Don't you think this makes sense?" Chu Wu instantly stopped and remained motionless. He seemed to be sulking. Chu Yi even flew out of the sword-nurturing gourd and charged into Chen Pinggan's Qi residence to stir up trouble. Fortunately, Chen Pinggan was now very indifferent to this pain. He jogged forward with a smile and went to the kitchen to help. Controlling the natal flying sword only consumed the mind and did not require the use of genuine qi. However, there was a distance limit when using the flying sword to kill the enemy. It was directly related to the realm of the swordsman, or the degree of concentration of the soul. There was no shortcut to breaking the distance limit of the flying sword. For a swordsman, it was to increase the realm. For Chen Pinggan, who had just won the title of Sword Immortal, It was to use the genuine qi of 18 holts of sword qi to break through more qi residences along the way. The bottleneck of Chu Yi's journey was a radius of 100 feet. Chu Wu's was 80 feet. Not far away was the kitchen, which was faintly lit. How is the name Zhong Shanfeng better than Chen Pinggan? Chen Pinggan slowed down his steps. Thinking of this, he was somewhat unconvinced. He suddenly grinned and laughed to himself. Hey, sword immortal. 2:20. The old woman was busy in the kitchen. When she saw Chen Pinggan, she was a little surprised. A gentleman should stay away from the kitchen. This was the teachings of the saints. Although there was also a saying that one should not be tired of eating and not be tired of eating, it did not mean that a gentleman would cook by himself. However, the old woman soon felt relieved. The young man in front of her had traveled far and wide, and he did not look like a child of a scholarly family. However, the old woman did not think that Chen Pinggan could be of much help. So, she asked him to help with some chores and watch the temperature of the stew. Chen Pinggan did not insist and helped with the chores. Finally, in the warm kitchen, the sound of the old woman skillfully cutting vegetables on the chopping board could be heard. Thud, thud, thud. Chen Pinggan sat on a small stool and peeled the bamboo shoots. There was a fresh smell of grass and wood. The old woman asked casually, "Young Master Chen, what happened to your left hand?" Chen Pinggan glanced at his bandaged left hand and smiled. "I accidentally fell down. It's nothing serious." The old woman rarely had someone to chat with, so she smiled and said, "The rain is slippery and caused you to be injured. Our house is already quite old. Previously, it was in a difficult situation where tigers and wolves were watching us, so we did not dare to show off. At most, we would just sew the courtyard walls and rarely hang lanterns at night. For so many years, we were afraid of scaring the people, so we did not dare to ask the bricklayers to help us. I was the one who messed around. Of course, my workmanship is bad. There are a lot of bluestone tiles that are bumpy and can't even be considered flat. If this was in the house of a big family in a big city, not only would it be an eyesore to their own family, but if other families saw it, they would laugh at us. They would definitely gossip behind our backs and say all kinds of unpleasant things. Fortunately, Master and Madam have never cared about this. This is my fortune." The old woman's tone was calm, like the still water. 100 years, happiness, anger, sorrow, joy, and separation had all settled in her heart. This is my fortune. This should be the conclusion of the old woman's life. Chen Pinggan said softly, "It's the couple's fortune to have an old lady like you running the house." The old woman was stunned for a moment. With a smile, she turned her head and teased, "Child, you look simple and honest. How can you be so good at talking?" Chen Pinggan had already put all the peeled bamboo shoots in a clean bamboo basket. He looked up and said, "Old woman, I'm telling the truth." The old woman looked at the young man's clear and spirited eyes and nodded. She turned around and the smile on her face widened. She casually said, "Young Master Chen, do you have a girl you like? The women in our beautiful robes country's Yanji County are famous for their beauty. If you are not in a hurry, you can go there and stroll around the temple fair or something. Maybe you will have a beautiful marriage. Besides, although your martial arts realm isn't high, in a small place like Yanji County, where there are no righteous gods or earth immortals, it really isn't bad. If you're willing to take root here, you're more than qualified to be a general or commandant. When the time comes, you can marry a well-bred girl from a scholarly family." Chen Pinggan was a little shy. He mumbled and did not dare to talk about this topic. The old woman turned her head and glanced at the young man. She smiled and said softly, "I know. Young Master Chen must have a girl he loves." Chen Pinggan held back for a long time. He asked with a red face, "Old woman, if the girl I like once asked me if I liked her and I said no, then went to find her and told her that I like her, do you think she would think I am a liar?" "Young Master Chen, your words are really confusing." The old woman could not help but laugh. She sat on a stool next to the stove and asked with a smile, "Then why didn't you say you liked her? Was it because you were timid and embarrassed?" Or did you feel that you would lose face in front of the girl if you nodded and said yes, so you deliberately played the hero? Chen Pinggan thought seriously and confidently. He gave a sincere answer, I am stupid. The old woman was really amused this time. She laughed so hard that her old face softened. I think the girl you like won't be angry. If a girl is liked by someone, and that person likes her completely, it is a beautiful thing. Chen Pinggan was a little distressed. He brought a bamboo basket of spring bamboo shoots to the stove. But that girl told me that she only likes the great sword immortal. The old woman held back her laughter. Oh, then it must be hard for you. The great sword immortal should at least be a sixth realm immortal. My young master is so talented. He used to cultivate in the high and mighty blessed enclave of the divine grandeur sect, but he never entered the middle 5 realms and reached the legendary immortal cave realm. Young Master Chen, let me give you a suggestion. You can discuss with that girl and see if you can change the requirement of Great Sword Immortal to Little Sword Immortal. For example, the Immortal Cave realm is too high. What about the 4th and 5th realms? You must know that sword cultivators in the world are still very popular no matter how low their realms are. The 4th and 5th realms are already very impressive. Chen Pinggan wanted to say something but stopped. Miss Ning's so-called Great Sword Immortal must be at least the 12th realm. Even if Ning Yaozhen was easy to discuss and agreed to lower it, it should be at least the Great Sword Immortal realm of the Wind Snow Temple's Wei and Jin dynasties, right? Chen Pinggan sighed and suddenly reminded, Granny, the dishes are ready. The old woman hurriedly got up and opened the lid of the pot. Soon, a delicious delicacy was placed on the plate. She asked Chen Pinggan to bring the dish to the main hall of the 3-section courtyard. She also asked him not to come back after delivering the dish and to eat and drink there. After that, she would serve the dishes and wine. Chen Pinggan ran out and back. Seeing the old woman pretending to be angry, Chen Pinggan asked with a smile, Granny, I'm here to get the wine. Also, I've talked to Master Yang and he promised to give me wine to drink. At this point, Chen Pinggan took off the wine gourd and shook it. He smiled brightly and said, until it's full. The old woman took out a wine ladle from an old red cupboard. Then, she smiled and pointed to a few large wine jars by the wall. Bring an unopened jar over. There's an opened jar on the side. There's still half a jar of homemade soju left. You can put it in the wine gourd. It'll be enough no matter what. Then, the old woman ignored the youth squatting in the corner and poured wine into the gourd. She continued to cook. Finally, Chen Pinggan bid farewell and left the kitchen with a jar of wine. The old woman smiled and turned to look at the vermilion wine gourd at the youth's waist. It was old and ordinary and unremarkable. This child was so young, but he was already an alcoholic. She didn't know if it would turn into a gourd of wedding wine or a heart-wrenching wine when he met the girl he liked. However, the old woman still hoped that the youth could fulfill his wish and become a master and madam like the young master and young lady. In the main hall of the 3-section courtyard, the atmosphere was joyous and harmonious. The master and mistress of the old house, the ghost Yang Huang and the female ghost named Yingying, sat on the left. The big-bearded swordsman was invited to the seat of honor. Xu Yuanxia was forthright and didn't bother to refuse. The Taoist priest Zhong Shanfeng sat on the right. After Chen Pinggan served the dishes and wine, they began to drink. The female ghost was a little funny. Her extremely long tree roots extended from the embroidery building like green vines and circled into the main hall from the door. In order not to spoil the fun, she even deliberately wore a thick veil to cover her face. The big-bearded swordsman had previously asked if there was any magic that could help the pitiful woman recover her face. Yang Huang smiled bitterly and shook his head. He didn't hide the truth and explained the reason in detail. It was related to the Qing Ci treasure advice of the God Grandeur sect, a heterodox formation secret technique, and the wood core of the ancient Yu Kingdom's ancestral elm tree. It was extremely messy because the formation of the old house and the wood core of the ancient elm tree were integrated into one and couldn't be moved. Moreover, the qi of the mountains and rivers within a radius of hundreds of miles was originally a mass grave. 200 years ago, The colorful clothes kingdom encountered a terrible plague and hundreds of thousands of people were infected and died suddenly. Most of them were randomly buried here in Yenji County. The successive emperors of the colorful clothes kingdom all hoped to change the feng shui of this place. However, even a Taoist immortal of the viewing sea state was summoned by the emperor when he was wandering through the colorful clothes kingdom. He personally came here and made many arrangements. Just 2 heavenly grand ritual alone cost nearly 1,000,000 taels of silver. Unfortunately, it only recovered for a few years before it returned to the mournful scene of rampant miasma and wandering ghosts. Even the immortals were helpless. The root was still in the feng shui of this land. It was not only a life-saving medicine for the female ghost, but it was also tantamount to drinking poison to quench thirst. One day, she would fall into an evil spirit. Yang Huang was blunt about this point, and the female ghost was also calm. It turned out that the husband and wife had already agreed that when that day came, they would both commit suicide to avoid harming the people. In fact, the core of the ancient elm was naturally clean. It was just that at that time, he was anxious to keep the female ghost Yingying's soul. In addition, he was desperate to find a cure, so her soul could only deteriorate step by step. If she could continue to absorb the pure aura of heaven and earth, she could actually recover her spirituality and even nourish the fate of the land, becoming an existence similar to the mountain god of lust. However, her nature as a god was definitely different from that of the Qin god because of the ancient elm. In the end, Yang Huang was open-minded and laughed. At most, in another 30 years, there would be no people, no wine, and no food in this house. Therefore, he hoped that Xu Yuanxia and the other 2 would come here more often before then. In any case, they could still have a clean room and bed as a place to rest. They could also chat happily like tonight. When it came to the enormous fate of hundreds of miles of mountains and rivers, the big-bearded machete man and the Taoist priest Zhong Shanfeng were speechless. They really could not come up with an effective solution because only the 10th realm Qi cultivators were qualified to give advice. It was an unwritten rule that the 10th realm Qi cultivators could be called saints. At first, it was a compliment of the secular dynasties because immortals of the upper 5 realms were too rare. The 10th realm Qi cultivators had to firmly occupy a blessed place with abundant aura. They needed a long time to accumulate their cultivation and break through the realm. Occasionally, they would also have to fight with the emperors and generals at the foot of the mountain. Therefore, common names such as the scholarly sage, the land immortal of Taoism, and the golden arhat of Buddhism were all included in this list. It was true that Chen Pinggan liked to drink nowadays, but he did not drink too much each time. The big-bearded machete man, on the other hand, had the personality of drinking big bowls and eating big chunks of meat. The Taoist priest Zhong Shanfeng's alcohol tolerance was even worse than Chen Pinggan's, but he was thin-skinned. After Yang Huang and Xu Yuanxia's persuasion, he drank half a bowl in one gulp. In the end, Chen Pinggan only dared to pour him a little wine each time. Even so, the young Taoist priest with the peachwood sword on his back was still swaying. His face was flushed, and his voice was much louder. He chatted with the big-bearded machete man about his Jianghu experiences and poems with the land-owning ghost Yang Huang. He was very happy. The old woman would bring a dish every few days. Seeing that a jar of wine was empty, she would bring another jar over. The host and guest were all very happy. Just as the second jar of wine was about to be emptied, a wail suddenly sounded. Brother Chu, where did you go? Don't leave me here alone." Soon, another sobbing voice sounded. "Little Taoist, surnamed Chen, how come you've disappeared too? Could it be that you were caught and eaten by evil spirits? Don't, the monster's in the house. If you want to eat people, then eat them together. Don't eat me alone in the end." The old woman had just brought a dish over and was about to appease the official's son surnamed Liu and explain the reason. Chen Pinggan hurriedly got up and said that he would go. The old woman thought that he was right. If she went, the poor scholar would probably faint from fright. When the scholar surnamed Liu was pulled into the courtyard by Chen Pinggan, his legs were trembling and his lips were ashen. After seeing the big-bearded machete man, his condition improved slightly. However, When he saw the terrifying tree roots from the back door into the main hall, his eyes rolled back and he almost fainted. Chen Pinggan tightened his grip on his arm, immediately waking him up from the pain. The scholar sullenly complained, "Just let me faint." Chen Pinggan said unhappily, "If you really can't do it, then go drink to boost your courage. You should at least have the courage to do that, right?" The scholar surnamed Liu said bitterly, "Can I not?" Chen Pinggan was so angry that he laughed. He said resolutely, "No." Carefully looking at the young man's face, the scholar surnamed Liu didn't seem to be an accomplice to a villain. He sighed and encouraged himself, "Fine, I'll drink. Even if I die, it's still wine." At the table, the scholar surnamed Liu lowered his head and didn't dare to look at anyone. He only focused on drinking. The big-bearded machete man laughed and asked, "You scholar, how can your luck be so bad? You made such a bad monster friend. He even went on a scenic tour and tricked you into coming here. However, you're lucky to be able to live until now and drink with us. Looking at your clothes, are you a rich son from the colorful clothes country?" The scholar surnamed Liu said with a trembling voice, "My father is the governor of Yanji County, but my family really doesn't have any money. I can't be considered a rich son." The big-bearded machete man didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Why? Do I look like a bandit?" The scholar raised his head and glanced at the big-bearded machete man, thinking that they couldn't be more alike. The big-bearded machete man stopped scaring the weak scholar. He suddenly became worried. "Brother Yang, will that old Taoist really get rid of the lewd ancestral mountain god? Will he deliberately let it go and leave it to disgust you?" The man shook his head and laughed. "Since Martial Uncle Fu is watching over this matter, the outer circle of the Divine Grandeur sect will definitely investigate to the end. Moreover, every batch of outer circle disciples go down the mountain to train and the final evaluation is extremely meticulous. Zhao Liu won't be able to act on his own." Yang Huang's expression suddenly changed. "I'm only worried that the lewd ancestral mountain god has a backer in the government. If Zhao Liu is bent and uses the pretense of not wanting to bully others to discuss this matter with the provincial governor, saying that it's a discussion, but in fact it's a private teaching, then it'll be difficult. Once Zhao Liu convinces the imperial court and the Ministry of Rights of the Colorful Robes Kingdom to take the initiative to ask to keep the lewd ancestral mountain god, or even to become a legitimate mountain god, it'll be very troublesome. Although the 5 mountain gods of the Colorful Robes Kingdom can't be compared to their counterparts in big countries and dynasties, they're only 6th realm Qi cultivators. They can only exert the strength of a sea-viewing realm in their own territory. The one surnamed Qin is after all a mountain god with a golden body. As long as Zhao Liu interferes and helps him obtain the Emperor's order, he may have the strength of a cave-dwelling realm. The immortal master from the Divine Grandeur sect can casually say a few words and the Emperor of the Colorful Robes Kingdom will consider carefully. After saying this, the big-bearded machete man, Taoist Zhong Shanfeng, and Chen Pinggan all looked at the trembling scholar at almost the same time. The scholar was at a loss. What 5 mountain gods, lewd ancestral mountain god, cave-dwelling realm, sea-viewing realm? He didn't understand a single word. He said timidly, "My father is only a 4th-rank county governor." "What mountain god? My father probably hasn't even heard of it." "He can't help." The big-bearded machete man smiled and said, "Don't worry, we're not asking for your father's help. We're just preventing him from making things worse. Early tomorrow morning, I'll accompany you back to Yanji County City and quickly go to pay a visit to the county governor. We can't let Zhao Liu beat us to it. I believe that as long as Zhao Liu sees me in the county governor's mansion, he'll know that his plan won't work. Even if it does, he'll have to be careful of us going to the Divine Grandeur sect to make a scene. We'll learn from the commoners who beat the drum in front of the government office and call for justice for the people." At the end, the big-bearded machete man laughed out loud. Ghost Yang Huang stood up and cupped his hands, saying, "Then I'll thank Brother Shu in advance." The big-bearded machete man suddenly had a strange expression on his face. He drank a mouthful of wine and said in a muffled voice, "Brother Shu something, I'm already too old to be your grandson." Yang Huang laughed and said, "A hero's background doesn't matter, and a friend's age doesn't matter. Even the female ghost's soft laughter seeped out from behind her veil. The weak scholar, who had gathered a little courage with great difficulty, was scared pale by the melancholy and lingering laughter. That night, the young Taoist priest drank too much. The scholar named Liu Gaohua didn't dare to drink to his heart's content. He was afraid that if he got drunk, he wouldn't be able to see the sun tomorrow. In the end, the four of them stayed in the courtyard with Chen Pinggan and Zhong Shanfeng in the wing next to each other. The scholar and the big-bearded machete man became neighbors. The night passed peacefully. At dawn, the Taoist priest Zhong Shanfeng got up and opened the door. He saw that Chen Pinggan was already practicing his walking stance in the courtyard. Compared to the first time they met, he felt that Chen Pinggan was getting slower. After eating the breakfast prepared by the old woman, the four of them left together. Because the sun was high in the sky, and because the master and mistress of the old house didn't like sunlight, they didn't go out to see them off. They stood by the embroidery building and waved from afar. The big-bearded man yawned and squinted at the increasingly dazzling sun. "Languid," he said, "it's a new day." The Taoist priest Zhong Shanfeng was talking to the scholar Liu Gaohua about the local customs of Yanji County. After Liu Gaohua walked out of the old house, his entire spirit changed. It was as if he had been injected with chicken blood. He talked non-stop and chatted happily with the young Taoist priest. Chen Pinggan suddenly turned around and walked to the threshold. He whispered to the old woman, "Granny, if, and I'm saying if, something troublesome happens, you can send a letter to the northernmost Dali Longquan County. Send it to a person called Wei Pai in the cloud-splitting mountain. Just say that Brother Yang Huang is my friend and that Chen Pinggan owes you a lot of wine." The old woman smiled and nodded. Although she didn't take it seriously, she still didn't reject this kindness. Some kindness was like the cold spring sunshine. Although there wasn't a big difference whether it was there or not, why should she reject it? Chen Pinggan stretched out his hand and handed over 7 to 8 pieces of snow. Dali Longquan and Rainbow Clothes Country are far away. This is the money for you to send the letter. This house had already exhausted all of Yang Huang's wealth. It was hard to make ends meet everywhere. Therefore, even the wine was brewed by himself and the dishes were picked by the old woman from afar. The old woman hesitated for a moment, but still accepted the few pieces of snow. Of course, sending a letter to the northernmost Dali dynasty in the Aquarius continent would cost a lot. However, it definitely wouldn't cost 7 pieces of snow. However, when the young man handed over a handful of coins, they were just like the copper coins in the marketplace. It was just a small handful, no more, no less. It was as if she rejected it, or purposely accepted a few pieces. It was as if she was unreasonable or pretentious. Even if she accepted it generously, she wouldn't owe him such a big favor. The old woman sighed. He was so young, yet he knew how to take care of other people's feelings. She didn't know how much hardship he had suffered when he was young to have such a sense of propriety. Daoist Zhong Shanfeng smiled and called out, "Chen Pinggan, let's go." Chen Pinggan sighed and said goodbye to the old woman. After running for a distance, he suddenly turned around and looked at the embroidery house. He shouted, "The book said, if there is a Qing in the house, let's get married." The female ghost at the embroidery house looked at each other and smiled knowingly. Although the husband and wife were no longer human, but it didn't matter. The young man with the sword sheath on his back and the gourd on his waist ran backwards and waved goodbye to the old woman again. "Grandma, the stir-fried pork with bamboo shoots is delicious. I will come again next time." The old woman stood at the door with a warm smile. Looking at the young man bathed in the sunlight, she sighed softly. The group arrived at the governor's mansion in Yanji County. The governor was dealing with government affairs in the official hall. The bearded swordsman and the Taoist priest Zhong Shanfeng sat in the simple living room, drinking tea brought by the maidservants. Liu Gaohua took Chen Pinggan all the way to his father's study like a thief because Chen Pinggan had asked him for a geomancy map of Yanji County, and it had to be the kind that had the seal of the imperial court. Although Liu Gaohua didn't know the inside story, he thought that he could leave the old house this time, and that he had seen demons and ghosts with his own eyes. He even sat at the same table with her and drank wine. When he thought of this, Liu Gaohua's heroic spirit soared. He patted his chest and promised to help Chen Pinggan steal a geomancy map of Yanji County from Tsai Kingdom. As a result, Chen Pinggan gave him 50 taels of silver without saying anything. Liu Gaohua originally wanted to say that they were friends in adversity and that talking about money would hurt their relationship. However, when he saw those heavy silver ingots, he suddenly felt that it was okay to hurt their relationship. Anyway, the chances of them meeting again in the future were not big. Liu Gaohua tiptoed and led Chen Pinggan to the study. After closing the door, he rummaged through the chests and cupboards. With great difficulty, he finally pulled out an old scroll. It was an antique geomancy map of Yanji County. It was a backup map. This was normal. Of the two official maps drawn by the Imperial Court's imperial astronomer, one would be hung in the main hall of the Yamen, and the other would be handed over to the local military general for safekeeping. Only this backup map would be left to collect dust. After Chen Pinggan confirmed that there was no mistake, he nodded and said, "This is it." He had to spend 50 taels of silver to buy a very small possibility. Mr. Qi once said that if he saw a geomancy map that he liked, he could take out the pair of seal of landscape and stamp it on it. There was no need for ink paste. After Chen Pinggan asked the scholar about the location of the old house on the map, he found an excuse and asked Liu Gaohua to go to the bookshelf and pick out a few books about landscape travel. When the scholar turned around, Chen Pinggan took out a pair of seals that looked like mountains and rivers meet. They were carved by Qi Jingchun. The quality of the seals was the best Lizhu Dongtian snake gall stone. Chen Pinggan looked at the two seals and exhaled heavily. Then, he aimed at the location of the old house and gently pressed it down. After that, he did not see anything strange. Chen Pinggan rolled up the geomancy map and tucked it under his arm. He said to Liu Gaohua, "Okay, let's go quickly. I don't want your father to find out. If he finds out, I won't care. I've given you the money, but I won't pay you back. You were beaten half to death by the county governor. The most I can do is pay for the medicine." Liu Gaohua casually took 2 books and threw them to Chen Pinggan. Then, they left the study together. Chen Pinggan sighed quietly. He felt that the plan he had in mind was probably not going to work. But this was normal. How could he change the geomancy of hundreds of miles by simply stamping a seal? He was not an immortal. However, Chen Pinggan miscalculated one thing. Of course, he was not an immortal. But the teacher who carved the seals. He was an immortal among immortals. As a result, the mountains and rivers within hundreds of miles around the old house were turned upside down. The filth receded and became clear. The mountain god temple where the mountain god of lust resided collapsed instantly. The golden body of the mountain god Qin shattered. Even though the old Taoist of the Divine Grandeur sect had let him go and had a private meeting with him to teach him the plan, the mountain god was overjoyed. He felt that he was finally going to have a great fortune. He was no longer the mountain god of lust temple who was struggling at death's door. Soon, he would become a righteous god supported by the immortals of the Divine Grandeur sect. Therefore, when his golden body shattered, he still did not understand the reason. He just sat on the altar in a daze and then disappeared. Zhao Liu of the Divine Grandeur sect was leaving the town with a group of young masters. He instantly sensed the change in the world. The old Taoist Zhao Liu was dumbfounded. Did the golden boy of the sect come out in person? Perhaps even the golden boy did not have this kind of supernatural power. The rest of the juniors of the Divine Grandeur sect were even more frightened. Only the young Taoist who seemed to be frightened lowered his head. His eyes were full of smiles. The child was secretly delighted. Damn it, I knew it. That guy is an old bastard who has lived for hundreds of years. He must have done this. Haha, when I go back to the sect and see my master, I must boast to him that I met an immortal of the upper 5 states this time. In the embroidered house, the ghost Yang Huang did not care about the sunlight that was burning his divine soul. He quickly flew to the roof of the embroidered house and looked around. The surroundings were full of vitality. Wisps of spiritual qi gathered from all directions. The man's face was full of shock and ecstasy. The female ghost broke the roof directly, exposing the ugly body under her dress to the sunlight. She took a deep breath. For the first time in 100 years, she felt refreshed and breathed smoothly. Yong Huang's eyes were red. He said excitedly, "There must be a saint who help." Maybe it was because of Martial Uncle Fu's appearance that the scene here fell into the eyes of an old immortal of the Divine Grandeur sect. No matter what, this is great news. It's something that I didn't even dare to dream of. The man choked with sobs and suddenly woke up. He knelt down and kowtowed 3 times to the 4 directions. The female ghost could not kneel down, so she bowed piously to the 4 directions. The old woman standing in the courtyard also bowed to the 4 directions. The old woman, who had almost never drunk wine in her life, suddenly thought of pouring a bowl of wine for herself. So what if it tasted bad? She had lived long enough in this life. It was the second life of others. The old woman went to the corner of the kitchen. She held a bowl of wine in one hand and a ladle in the other. She put the ladle into a wine jar that had already been opened. Why was there so little wine left? It did not make sense. The old woman was stunned and puzzled. Then she frowned and felt her scalp tingle. The old woman threw away the bowl and ladle. She stood up abruptly and murmured, "How is it possible? How is it possible?" She wiped the sweat from her forehead and suddenly smiled. She scooped up half a bowl of wine and then walked out of the kitchen. She sat on the bench in the veranda and looked at the sunlight that quietly scattered on the ground of the courtyard. The old woman drank the wine in small sips. It was rare for the white-haired old woman to be so leisurely. She had nothing on her hands and nothing on her mind. Previously, on such a warm and sunny day, there was a northern youth named Chen Pingan. He carried a wooden box on his back and jogged backwards. He smiled and waved goodbye to the old woman. There was a small red gourd hanging on his waist. There was wine, sword, and Jianghu inside. It turned out that he was a drunken sword immortal. The old woman drank the wine and thought with a smile, "Such a good boy. How good would the girl he likes be, AP Pap?" (221) In the governor's mansion in Yanji County. After stealing his father's geomancy candidate map, the family thief Liu Gaohua felt a little guilty. He felt that the 50 taels of silver were a little hot, so he wanted to make up for it. He left the bearded swordsman and the other 2 people in the living room and ran to the official hall where his father dealt with government affairs. He said that he had met the immortals in books during his travels. Among them, the bearded man who used a saber was a Jianghu hero who was famous in Jianghu. Even the best master in the county might not be his match. There was also a celestial master Zhong from Dragon Tiger Mountain. He carried a peachwood sword on his back and had a profound family history. It was easy for him to kill demons and subdue demons. The last one with the surname Chen was even more extraordinary. Although he looked like a teenager, he was actually 80 or 90 years old. It was just that he had achieved success in cultivation and looked like a young boy. His son Liu Gaohua's extravagant flattery made the prefectural governor skeptical. Feeling a little uneasy, he brought an experienced and knowledgeable aide to the living room to entertain the guests. As a result, prefectural governor Liu was greatly disappointed. It was true that his son had not seen many supernatural beings, but he had a good eye for people. After greeting them, he sat down and drank a cup of tea. He was not in the mood and asked Liu Gaohua to entertain the 3 guests well. Then, he found an excuse to return to the official hall. Along the way, Governor Liu shook his head and said, "What celestial master of chivalry? He doesn't live up to his name. He swindled his way to my mansion. He is really bold. If he dares to make an unreasonable request in the future, I will make sure he stays in prison until he is full." The old aide laughed softly and said, "He won't go that far. It's hard to say about the young Taoist priest and the young man with the box. That swordsman does have some real skills. The guards in the mansion are definitely not his match. Lord Liu, before I entered the mansion, I traveled in Jianghu for more than 20 years and met several famous Jianghu grandmasters. In the south of our colorful robes country, they are all top masters. In terms of bearing, the bearded man is not inferior. His eyes are bright and his bearing is strict. Governor Liu nodded and said, "If that's the case, it does make some sense." The old aide reminded him in a low voice, "Lord Liu, think about it. The general stationed in our province is a recognized great grandmaster of the 4 states. We once watched him from a distance at a banquet. At that time, even though he was drinking and laughing, he still had a dignified spirit. It was very scary. Think carefully. Isn't it similar to that Jianghu man with the surname Shu?" Governor Liu frowned and said, "From what I heard, you mean to. Is not polite. I have always been an honest official. I have always been an honest official. I. When scholars looked at Jianghu people, especially those who were court officials, they didn't think highly of them." The old aide sighed in his heart. This county chief Liu couldn't even accept the Jianghu connections that he had delivered to his doorstep. He couldn't blame County Chief Liu for only being a 4th-rank official despite his good writing skills. Moreover, County Chief Liu's teacher, Master Fang, was now a high-ranking official in the colorful robes country. If he was the governor, not to mention borrowing money from rich people, he wouldn't hesitate to sell everything he had. If that big-bearded swordsman was a great grandmaster of the Jianghu, as long as he had a connection, then there were many things he could do under the table. Furthermore, people. You are the one giving face to that family. However, Governor Liu didn't like to hear such things. He felt that it was a disgrace. After the old aide mentioned it a few times, he understood. Thinking about this, the old aide felt a little disheartened. The official world was so complicated. Wasn't the Jianghu the same? Before he had concealed his identity, he had actually been a trusted advisor to a southern Jianghu alliance master of the beautiful clothes nation. Although there were grudges and gratitude, there were even more trivial matters in the world. Even if you were an unrivaled hero and full of spirit, you would still be worn out in a few years. Back then, how heroic was the old alliance master? In the end, didn't he still end up with a broken family? After Governor Liu left indifferently, Liu Gaohua felt a little embarrassed. Plus, the governor's mansion was so shabby that it couldn't even spare a few guest rooms. The big-bearded swordsman asked Liu Gaohua to take him to the nearest inn to stay. As long as the old Taoist from the Divine Grandeur sect entered the mansion in the county city, he should immediately inform the 3 of them. Liu Gaohua agreed repeatedly. Because of the good location and the old reputation, the inn's business was booming. Fortunately, the face of the governor's legitimate son was worth some money. He took out 3 guest rooms and didn't dare to raise the price. Liu Gaohua accepted this favor from the beginning to the end. He didn't realize that the inn's manager was feeling sorry for him. This made the big-bearded swordsman laugh. Even the Taoist priest Zhong Shanfeng shook his head. The ways of the world were also knowledge. This knowledge wasn't taught in the books of the sages, but there were many in the Jianghu. Chen Pinggan saw it and remembered it in his heart. In fact, there were also such things in the streets like Clay Bottle Alley and Apricot Blossom Alley. The 3 of them chatted in the room of the big-bearded swordsman. Naturally, they talked about this trip to the old mansion and Zhong Shanfeng's divine travel talisman. After Xu Yuanxia asked about the price and found out that it was so expensive, she felt a little sorry for this Taoist priest from the Ju Luzhu. She smiled and said that she must have some gains in the next trip to slay demons. Although Zhong Shanfeng was scared of being poor, he didn't complain at all. This made Xu Yuanxia see him in a new light. The man knew how important it was for a qi cultivator to accumulate wealth on the path of cultivation. Xu Yuanxia, who had traveled the north and south, knew the rules of some of the immortals on the mountain very well. Qi cultivators cultivated for a long time. They cultivated their mind and strength. What they cultivated was real gold and silver. If the young Taoist priest couldn't make ends meet, it would be difficult for him to go higher. No matter how good his mind was, he couldn't withstand such a blunt knife cutting his flesh. After chatting for a while, Chen Pinggan understood the glory of the lower 5 realms for the first time. Previously, when he returned from the Great Sui Kingdom with his disciple Kui Dong, Lin Shuyi was already half an immortal on the mountain. Chen Pinggan was a little curious about this. It was a rare occasion when the two of them chatted. For the first time, Chen Pinggan took the initiative to ask about qi cultivation. In the end, the young Kui Dong rolled his eyes and said, "The lower 5 realms? They're all rubbish. How boring is it to talk about that? It's simply damaging to your reputation. Sir, why don't we talk about the upper 5 realms? Back then, I was at least at the 12th realm." At that time, Chen Pinggan had a deep prejudice against him. He didn't want to listen to the white-clothed youth's boastful talk. He got up and went far away to practice the upright sword furnace. Now that Chen Pinggan thought about it, did it hurt Kui Dong's self-esteem? In any case, he was once an immortal at the 12th realm. He even played chess with the city lord of White Emperor City in the colored clouds. Chen Pinggan scratched his head and lowered his head to drink his tea. But what he was thinking was that he regretted sending the 2,000 taels of silver along with the letter to Kui Dong Shan. To be so polite to the former immortal's disciple, he didn't pay attention. Wasn't this insulting? The lower 5 realms of qi cultivators were the ascending 5 realms, the Copperskin realm, the Grassroot realm, the Willow Tendon realm, the Bonechi realm, and the Hut Building realm. The first 4 realms respectively cultivated the skin, flesh, tendons, and bones. Although they were called qi cultivators, in fact, cultivating a tough body was also very important. The logic was simple. If the human body was a water bowl, it could cultivate 1 jin of qi. If the water bowl could only hold 8 taels, the remaining 2 taels would be empty talk. The last realm was to master through a comprehensive study, smelting and casting. It was the realm of great success for the qi cultivator. The general meaning was that one could officially ascend the mountain. Because the ghost Yang Huang had mentioned the Willow Tendon realm many times, saying that it was the leaving man behind realm, the bearded man explained it to Chen Pinggan, a layman. He spoke with great relish, full of the ridicule of a martial artist towards the immortals on the mountain. This made the young Daoist who was stuck at the 3rd realm feel very helpless. There was once a pillously talented cultivator surnamed Liu. Just by cultivating his tendons, he directly ascended to the upper 5 realms, achieving a supreme immortal body. It could be said that no one before and no one since. Therefore, this realm was named after the Willow Tendon realm. There is also the saying of the leaving man behind realm. This is because many cultivators who have extravagant hopes of taking shortcuts have gone astray. In this realm, they spend too much time on the incomplete secret manual left behind by the cultivator surnamed Liu. If they delay for too long, it will affect their whole life. The bearded man drank his tea in a heroic manner as if he was drinking wine. His words were full of ridicule. We martial artists are always looked down upon by the cultivators on the mountain. However, there is one thing that we are stronger than qi cultivators. That is, every step we take is solid. There are no messy shortcuts to take. We are the most down-to-earth. Therefore, this Willow Tendon realm has attracted who knows how many young cultivators in the world who are hoping for a fluke. Moreover, for qi cultivators of the lower 5 realms, as long as they are not military or sword cultivators, when they meet us 3rd realm martial artists, they will not have the slightest advantage. The young Daoist was the only qi cultivator present. He said sullenly, "You martial artists have ascended to the 3rd realm of qi cultivators. We qi cultivators have ascended to the middle 5 realms. We qi cultivators will definitely have a higher chance of winning." The bearded man laughed mischievously. "We only compete in the same realm. A 9th realm golden core qi cultivator, isn't he immortal enough? Why don't you try meeting us peak realm martial artists? That vassal Song Jankyung of Dali, you few 10th realm qi cultivators dare to be arrogant in front of him? This Song Jankyung is the one among our Aquarius continent's pure martial artist." The bearded man gave a thumbs up. He was still unwilling to retract his thumbs up. He praised, "This kind of martial artist is the true hero of the world. Although he is at the foot of the mountain, he can look down on the mountain. It's a pity that I, Shu Yuanxia, can't meet him. Otherwise, I will shamelessly toast him with a bowl of wine." Chen Pinggan had a strange expression on his face. Wasn't vassal Song Jankyung Song Jisin's biological uncle? Previously, when they passed by Mud Bottle Alley, Chen Pinggan had even met Song Jianqiang face to face. Besides, he was a pure martial artist who was similar to Song Jianqiang. Just in his hometown town, there was Li Huai's father, not to mention Kui Dong's grandfather. Chen Pinggan could only drink his tea silently. After that, the three of them went to the first floor of the inn to eat. There was a lot of discussion at the dining table in the hall. It turned out that there was an old immortal who was about to arrive at Yanji County. His magical power was unpredictable. The immortals in books could cast beans to become soldiers, but he could cast paper to become beauties. Those graceful women, after the yellow paper fell to the ground one by one, they were no different from living people. They could sing and dance, and spoke fluently. The old immortal's journey to the south had already made the high officials and dignitaries of Colorful Clothes Nation gasp in amazement. Therefore, before the old immortal arrived at Yanji County, this county city of Colorful Clothes Nation, which was famous for its beauties, was already looking forward to it. The men were looking forward to those magical beauties that were transformed from paper. Did they have any special charm? The slightly beautiful women were all competitive. How could a thin piece of paper win against them? Chen Pinggan was not very interested. The bearded man and the Taoist priest Zhong Shanfeng were eager to give it a try. They said that they must go and take a look. One of them vowed that the old immortal might be a demon in human skin, while the other nodded vigorously in agreement, saying that they would not allow demons to bewitch people's hearts. Chen Pinggan looked at the two guys who were full of righteousness and thought, "Can you two wipe your saliva before you speak? Don't you just want to see beautiful women? Just say it. I won't laugh at you." Alas, in the end, they had never seen a truly beautiful woman. Chen Pinggan was very confident about this point, because he felt that he had already seen the most beautiful woman in the world. Her eyebrows were like distant mountains. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.